across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome to the home of common sense. Thank you to Duncan. He's back tomorrow at 10 o'clock in for Julia Hartley-Brewer. Looking forward to that. As you've been hearing, counter-terrorism police have now taken over the investigation into the killing of Ann Widdecombe. This is after fresh evidence came to light, reigniting urgent questions over the safety and protection afforded to politicians and public servants. We have Shabir Ahmed making a statement in Parliament in just a little while. We'll bring that to you when we get it. And, of course, any breaking news on this case. Also this afternoon, Andy Burnham facing demands to appear before MPs before the summer recess, with Conservatives branding it unacceptable that Britain's next Prime Minister could enter Downing Street without ever facing scrutiny in the Commons. He could have his swimming trunks on before he has anything else on, frankly, because it's holiday time down there at Westminster. And in the same patch, Ollie Robbins, remember him, former senior civil servant at the Home Office, has launched legal action against the government over his sacking as Britain's top diplomat, seeking a judicial review after Downing Street blamed him for failing to flag Lord Mandelson's vetting failures ahead of his ambassador appointment. We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. Very simple to get in touch, 0344 499 1000. You can drop us a voice note there as well, and you can message 87222. And we are going to continue with that question. Should politicians have more protection?
One theory doing the rounds, and I discussed this with the Prime Minister yesterday, is that it was a burglary that went wrong. But the car went onto the drive at approximately 12:25, 12:30 on Wednesday. She'd done one interview in the morning and she was due to do another one at 1 o'clock. So if you were a burglar, would you literally drive your car onto someone's drive? You wouldn't. From what I can see of it, from what I can make out, this was premeditated murder.
And drive 5 hours to rob somebody. It's a question that suddenly feels horribly relevant, of course, on that issue of politicians and more protection. Now, let's remember, before anyone jumps to conclusions, let's be absolutely clear. The police have said this.
We retain primacy of this investigation and detectives remain open-minded about the potential motive. At this stage, there is nothing to suggest that it was politically motivated.
Now, that's key to all of this. Currently, no evidence to suggest that the tragic murder of Anne is politically motivated. We should let the investigation run its course. We don't, of course, commentate. We're not streaming an investigation, as it were. But it should be said, as you heard from Duncan, the last 20 minutes or so, it's been announced that counter-terrorism police have now taken over the investigation after new evidence has come to light. Now, interestingly, that also doesn't mean that there is political motivation. This could be a completely different motivation. But the fact that counter-terrorism police have taken over this after, quote, new information has come to light is key. It does force us to ask a much bigger question. Has being a politician simply become too dangerous? We're all familiar with some of the horrific stories out there. Joe Cox, David Amis, Stephen Timms, who survived a stabbing in his surgery. MPs needing panic alarms, security briefings and abuse so vile it would make a dock worker blush. Social media has turned political disagreement into personal hatred. Somewhere along the line, we stopped arguing with politicians and started treating them as the enemy. If we don't agree with them, they're the enemy. I mean, look at the horrendous things that are said on social media. And what's interesting, if you ever wanted, I suppose, a greater example of how vile and bilious some people have become, then look at the tragic killing of Ann Widdecombe. Because those horrendous tweets that people send to their MP or to a cabinet minister don't stop when you're dead. And we've seen some of the most egregious, nasty, vile comments being said about Anne. It's sort of extraordinary. Your jaw drops when you read this stuff and you think, these people live among us. Here's the irony, of course. Most MPs spend half their lives being told they're useless, overpaid and never in Westminster, while the other half is spent being told they should be out meeting the public more. It's a bit difficult to kiss babies and shake hands, of course, when you're wondering whether the person next to you in the queue is carrying flowers or something worse. Who in their right mind would sign up to be a politician? So whether you're left-wing, right-wing, somewhere in between, a democracy only works if decent people are willing to stand for office. If entering Parliament increasingly means putting your family, your privacy, perhaps even your life on the line, then politics starts to become a fool's game, and that's a danger to every single one of us. It's unbelievable that we live in this era, and the digital world, the social media world, with all its amazing positives, has thrown up these horrendous, horrific, and sometimes lethal negatives. Have we reached a point where being a public figure, particularly a politician, is simply too dangerous? Should we give all of these people some kind of protection? How would that, what sort of democracy would that be when every MP has to have an armed guard? I mean, these are the people that are the conduit to democracy for you, their constituents. That's the whole point of a free democracy. We don't have people walking around armed because they're invariably are not coming from some rogue state where they might have upset somebody or there's a mafia-like underpinning to their political allegiances. You know, all of that, that ain't us. But it's sort of becoming us. So we've reached a curious time. And it's a fair question. Should politicians have more protection? 0344 499 1000. As I mentioned, Shabir Ahmed will be making a statement in the House of Commons this afternoon. It may not come in this show, could be around about 4:30 on the suspected murder of Ann Widdecombe. But, of course, we will bring it to you here on Talk at whatever time it happens. Let's get a word on this from Oscar Reddrop, former number 10 advisor. Oscar, good afternoon to you. I would imagine that at your time working up close and personal with government, there were many questions about security, and if you're working with high-profile figures, understandably, that works. I think it's 5 offices of state, big offices, where armed protection just comes with the job, and that's been the case for years. But increasingly, it's sort of trickling down to often constituency MPs who have to, if nothing else, have some kind of bouncer standing there at the door of the community centre just to hold a surgery.
Absolutely. And we have these conversations every time there is the death of a politician in this country. We feel like, yeah, we're going to learn these lessons, and then we talk about it for a bit and then it dies down and nothing happens. I mean, not to kind of contextualize too much, but you know, Ann Widdecombe isn't even a sitting MP, right?
Yeah.
You know, Ann Widdecombe was just so admirably, ferociously confident and self-assured about how she sees the world. You know, maybe that had something to do with it, that she was such a strong, certain voice in this country. It's obviously incredibly sad, and I know we're talking about more the practicalities of what this means moving forward. But you know, I remember as a kid watching the documentary she made of Louis Theroux, and it was funny because Louis Theroux, you know, probably quite a liberal London kind of BBC interviewer, and starts the interview quite snarkily in that kind of way that Louis likes to do. And by the end, he's like, I thought she was brilliant. Like an amazing woman, and then really, really liked her. And I think that was the power of her. But anyway, moving forward, politics is so loud now. And I know, you know, I almost tired hearing myself say it, but social media, blah, blah, blah. But we do live, it's really interesting. Like back in the day, before social media and the like, if you wanted to say something really horrible to someone, you'd kind of have to say it to their face. And then you would have to weigh up the risk of doing that and bear the consequences of doing that. Yeah. Now, we live in a world where you can anonymously, in many cases, which I think on a platform like X, I don't think that's right, if I'm honest. But a lot of the time you can anonymously just say whatever you want, no matter how nasty, vile, threatening, aggressive it is, and suffer no consequences. And we've had so many chats, you know, about the online safety bill and all this stuff, and like the idea of a kind of state control of what we do and say online. But so I'm not asking for that. But I think it's so sad that just we might be losing a bit of decency. Like, hang on, would I say that to this person in the street? No. So
Exactly.
I'm
You wouldn't say it out loud to some of your mates. You couldn't tell. You know, I often see somebody write something and then you look at the biog and it says proud dad of 2. And I thought, you can't tell your kids, what'd you do today, Dad? Oh, what I did, right, I went online and there's this woman I don't like and I disagree with, so I massively abused her using every 4-lettered expletive I could think of. You couldn't tell anyone you've done that.
Exactly. And we're not going to get into the investigation and the ins and outs of it, but as she is not a sitting MP, I do feel that there was something about how unapologetic she was maybe in her views, and how admirable and rare that is now. Because again, do you attract the likes of Ann Widdecombe into frontline politics now because of, ironically and sadly enough, because of what has happened to Ann Widdecombe? You know, like, so what do you get? You get people who go, oh God, I'm not putting myself in the way of that. You get less talent, and then the actual talent that we do get in there, or not talent, sorry, but I'd say the vast majority, when you look at politicians back in the day compared to now, there's no conviction politics like we used to have, because we just get this kind of like lanyardy, wishy-washy, grey, nothingy, kind of online, ironically enough, MP these days. And I think that's very dangerous for democracy and sad for democracy as well.
Indeed. And as you rightly say, you know, social media does play a massive part in this. A mate of mine, who we'll call Mick for the purposes of this, is a ferocious campaigner against digital ID, and he's kind of signed every petition. He's organised some petitions. He's not quite a conspiracy. It's not tinfoil hat territory, Oscar, but he absolutely believes and has intellectualised his arguments that, you know, the banking industry, the government, that digital ID is a step too far. And recently he said, with one exception. Social media, he said, I would digital ID you out of your pants if you want to subscribe to Twitter, Facebook or anywhere. You should absolutely be. And he was saying it slightly tongue-in-cheek, and I think it's because he gets in a few rows himself over there. And of course you don't know who you're rowing with. Is it a Russian bot? Is it somebody real? Is it somebody real who's anonymous? Sometimes somebody horrendous is not anonymous, and that's rather interesting when you think about the stuff people say, and they've then got to go out and, you know, you click on the profile. Somebody's just done a hatchet job on a dead politician, and you realise, says, oh, I'm the headmaster at St Mary's High School. And you think, really? You've actually got your job title there, and you've just said all of that? So there's all of those kind of elements to this. And I don't know whether, you know, the argument is, did social media just bring out what was already in some people? It's just given a platform for that level of hatred. I genuinely believe, no matter how many times we say it, you've got to act with responsibility. You're under the same laws of publishing as a Telegraph or a Guardian journalist when you write. But I don't think you can tell Bob in Arbroath that, because it doesn't seem to wash. I'll tell you how bizarre it is. I first saw, there's this footage out there, which is now official, of the suspect in the Ann Widdecombe case getting into his car. You'd have probably seen this by now, Oscar, in his driveway at 10 to 8 on Friday morning. I saw somebody post that. My instant assumption was that it was not true. I just assumed that it was not true. There's no way they've got that footage. It's not true. Now, and then, of course, I realised, once I carried on looking, that this is now headline news on official media site. But that's the kind of faith in social media that you have, where your assumption is, I'm reading it here, so it's probably not true. And, of course, that goes for all manner of issues. And when you look at security and threats, and I mentioned that Ann Widdecombe, if a woman that, by all accounts, has died the most horrific death at the age of 78, and yet there are still people out there who are willing to write the most horrendous things, even knowing this, that a 78-year-old woman was left to die in her own bathroom on her own, and yet people will still pile on. And then we ask the question, should we be giving protection to politicians? And you're sort of forced to think, well, probably some sort of protection if you've got people like this out there.
Yeah, on the first part of that, I mean, the real world is complicated enough, right? The why, it's kind of painful that as humans we've found a way of intertwining that with a very, very doubtful at times, always second-guessing digital world that we now live in as well. Yeah. And on the point about Anne, you know, I have seen some horrific comments about her online after her death. And you do, as you said, you see the job titles, you see these like family men and women, and you just think, the only thing I could put it down to is like, you know, they see a TV personality and they kind of go, I'm not excusing it, by the way, and they kind of just subconsciously, they think, oh, they're not a real person. There's this thing that she was, you know, Ann Widdecombe or whoever it may be, is this thing that exists online. Yeah. And she's not really a real person. So I can say these hateful, horrible things about a poor old woman, you know, with loved ones and an incredible life, you know.
But the fact, I also think, Oscar, the fact that Anne looked and sounded as she did, there's a great deal of kind of, not to be too twee and right on about this, but there's quite a lot of sexism in this as well. I mean, again, not to cheapen the point, Susan Boyle, the X Factor winner, who, you know, she had the last life, she's now a multi-millionaire, but the fact that she was criticised because of how she looked, really, rather than any talent she had. And I think the same with Ann Widdecombe. People looked at her. Spitting Image had a field day with her. They wouldn't get away with some of that now. You know, she was school mistressy. She was the person that would tell other people's kids off in the pub for being a bit loud. She was all of that. And that really fed into the hatred some people felt, which is curious.
There was a certain journalist, certain broadcast journalist on a certain broadcast channel who, in the wake of her murder, I think we knew it was murder at the time. Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Described her as all of the above. And I couldn't believe, you probably know what I'm alluding to.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I couldn't believe what I was watching. Why? Using the term spinster.
Yep.
And I think he called her a maid, or like a maid.
She went from a spinster to an old maid. I think he mentioned her virginity. I
couldn't believe
it was horrific.
What I was watching. I just think, and they were. Sorry, I'm not being very articulate, but I was just like, this is an incredible woman who's been murdered. And you're just leaping to this, just so kind of nonchalantly.
It was, it was followed by a sort of slightly tacit apology. But the idea that somebody who's an experienced journalist, experienced political journalist, political editor, went there was just extraordinary.
So we do look, I think people let their politics get in the way sometimes. And I think when it, you know, politics, you know, I'm not particularly twee about politics. Politics is brutal, you know, like, and it's kind of meant to be, because it's the battle for how we live our lives. And you can't do that nicey the whole time. So these people who talk about, you know, softer, gentler politics. Yeah. And I've even seen Andy Burnham saying, I'm going to do things so differently. We're all going to work together. Good luck, brother. It just doesn't work like that.
And particularly when, you know, you worked up and close and personal with Boris once in a while, because I've got a vague idea of how this thing works. You'd have been in the back of that car with him. You know what
it's brutal.
You know what it's like. You've got 16 armed people around you wherever you go.
It's completely brutal. And, like, you know, and that's just the way it's going to go. Having said that, when someone has been murdered, leave your politics at the door. And if you cannot do that, you need to have a long, hard look at yourself.
Spot on. Oscar, stay with us. Lots more to come. We are exploring that question. It's a reasonable one to look at. Should public figures have more protection? Politicians, in particular, having more protection. And when we look at what's happening, look, maybe Anne's death was not politically motivated. Interesting that counter-terrorism police they've now taken over the investigation. That still doesn't, curiously, mean it's automatically political. Could be something else going on. I mean, in the Venn diagram, they're quite close, these things, but you take the point. But nonetheless, it throws up the very reasonable question about the vulnerability of public figures, disagreement, the fact we've reached Wild West proportions in how we argue with each other. You no longer have an opponent, you only have an enemy, people you want dead, because, I mean, how many times have we seen people tweet that? And we have real examples of it. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
I've thought about it hard, and I've decided today I will resign as a Member of Parliament for Clacton-on-Sea, thereby forcing a by-election.
Count Thin-Face apparently is now 5-1.
Brilliant.
You know, so look, I mean, you know, if I were being flippant, I'd say Count Thin-Face's campaign is now well and truly up and running, and Reform are struggling to put a lid on it.
Let me be absolutely clear. I have done nothing wrong. I have not broken the law.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is indeed Talk. 0344 499 1000. Oscar Redrop is with us, former number 10 advisor. Let's have a look at this story then. Oscar, Andy Burnham becomes Prime Minister in 10 days' time, I think I'm right. 1 week's time. So 1 week today. So that is July the 20th, just days after Parliament breaks for 6 weeks. The Tories call this unacceptable and want Labour to delay the break by one sitting day so that MPs can actually question him on his plans before he vanishes for the entirety of summer. Whatever happens, the next Prime Minister is right around the corner.
Strange thing to say, but I've just been in to nominate myself to be leader of the Labour Party. The nomination process has opened this morning, so glad to see some MPs going in. I'm still the only candidate in the race. We'll get the first indication about 7 p.m. tonight of the first number of MPs to sign up, but the thing will go on over the next few days, so it won't be the final word. But yeah, it's all starting to feel very real.
Yeah, I mean, just a word on this kind of newfangled TikTok-y sort of Burnham little video post. You know, a bit weird, mate. I've just been in there to vote, and it's just almost you can see a teenager kind of saying, I nicked my mum and dad's polling card and I went and had a vote. You know, it's amazing, isn't it? I'm only 11. It's just a bit weird. This is the bloke who's going to be our Prime Minister in about 3 weeks' time. He's going to be standing in the Oval Office, pressing the flesh with Donald Trump, mooching around the world at NATO summits and more. It's a bit weird, but the overarching point here is the fact that he becomes the Prime Minister and then disappears for the summer.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, at the end of that video where he's saying, oh, it's all starting to feel a bit real now. I mean, it doesn't fill you with too much confidence. And yes, Andy, it is going to get very real. And to use a footballing analogy, like he hasn't done a lot of media. When he did his big, you know, economic speech up in Manchester, after the by-election win, there were no media questions allowed. I think that's outrageous, by the way. I really, really do. I couldn't believe it. Yeah. I honestly couldn't believe he was not taking questions from the media. He's been very, very quiet ever since. And it's, to using a football analogy, if he then disappears for the summer, it's basically having no pre-season warm-up games, no, you know, fitness training whatsoever, and then, you know, saying, oh, yeah, I'll win you the World Cup final straight away, because that is the level of intensity he's going to face, and rightly so, because the problems the country faces both domestically and as we sit as a country in the world right now, the problems that we're facing is incredibly high-stakes, dangerous world at the moment. So I think the Tories are absolutely right to say, hang on a minute, mate, you can't just go off on your jollies. We need to put you under the microscope. And then added to that, the Labour Party haven't even bothered to do that by selecting another candidate. So I have huge concerns about this, huge concerns. And look, like, I was no fan of Keir Starmer, do not get me wrong. And even Keir Starmer was relatively late into politics. And Andy, despite what he likes to convect and present, is much more entrenched in the typical, you know...
Yeah, he's a professional politician.
Dare I say it, middle class, you know, lanyard politician's career path. No judgment there, of course.
No.
But Keir Starmer, like, he's pretty battle-hardened, you know? And I just think this guy now from Manchester... He's not going to get 10 years like he did in Manchester to get things right. You know, hope on every postcode and all this lovely wishy-washy TikTok stuff. It does concern me. It really, really does, because he's, I don't mean literally, but like, he is the spotlight, those floodlights of scrutiny, of challenges, of decision-making, of not just deciding where to spend the money, but where the hell you're getting the money from and who you're taking it off. For his own benefit, sorry, last thing, for his own benefit, I would implore him to hang around this summer, get stuck in, tell us, take questions from the media, present your case, get muscle ready.
You'd think so, but I reckon this suits him just fine, doesn't it? Because one of the warnings that went to Burnham is that, well, you're not going to get much time to put a government together, as well as the additional policies you want to throw into the mix as well. Well, of course, he has got the time now, hasn't he? Because he'll have 6 weeks over the summer. He's had the last couple of weeks, or the last week or so, since it was officially really only going to be him, and then he's got 6 weeks until late August, September.
But it's more zombie government time.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I was arguably part of one. But, like, the Tories, it took a long old time for the Tories to get to that state, well over a decade. And, a pandemic and all the rest of it. This Labour government have only been in power in their first term for around 2 years. And I would argue, when that Mandelson stuff really took hold, what was that, like 6 months ago, maybe a year ago? Around that time, basically from that point onwards, they've been in a tailspin ever since. So if you add that, and then we've had these months now of Starmer kind of, winding down, finally resigning. Then you had a few more months for Andy to just chill out in Manchester and, and finally get ready for government. We spent pretty much nearly over a year of a government that is not doing anything. And it's not doing anything. It really isn't. It is not cracking on.
No.
It is surviving and reinventing itself. And I don't think that's right.
I don't think it's right either. Oscar, Ollie, I've got Ollie Robbins here to talk about. You're Oscar. I don't want to mix the two up. Not in this story, anyway. Let's just finally, we'll have to be brief on this one. Ollie Robbins, sacked in April, of course. He was the former head honcho at the Foreign Office after Number 10 claimed that he was the one who kept quiet about Lord Mandelson failing his vetting for the ambassadorial role in Washington. Now he's taking the government to court, launching a judicial review over his dismissal. Let's have a reminder of what all blew up earlier this year.
A position taken from the Cabinet Office was that there was no need to vet Mandelson. He was a member of the House of Lords. He was a Privy Councillor. The risks that attending his appointment were well known and had been made clear to the Prime Minister before appointment.
Very gentle chap, huge brain, much respected, now unemployed, sort of. He's now essentially saying unfair dismissal, Governor.
Yeah, not surprised by this at all, and fair play to him.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you're in the midst of a political crisis, and people are getting sacked right, left and centre, everyone's just caught up in that. And then when there's a bit of time goes by, he's probably woken up and gone, hang on a minute.
Yes.
I was just collateral damage in a desperate government and a desperate Number 10 just trying to survive. That's not right. And very finally, before you go, because I know we didn't get time to do it, in these Falklands renegotiations, the Argentinian foreign minister saying, they want the Falklands back. Can I just quickly do the negotiations?
Please do. Yeah.
You can't have the Falklands back, and you can't play in the World Cup final next week either. Come on, England.
Yeah, well, in fact, I don't know why I've got this feeling, and you shouldn't say these things out loud, but I think this is going to be a bloodbath for Argentina on Wednesday.
Oh,
I think this is going to be. For some reason, I keep thinking of Messi and broken ankle, so he won't even get a game. So there's that. I know that Maradona's not playing, so we're all right. We're safe on that. By the way, I was watching that, hand of God. I was just watching, as you do if you like football, hand of God moment, of course. But the goal that he then went on to score, which I'm sure you've seen as well, which was just off the scale. You've seen it, Finn. It's just something.
The greatest goal of all time. But England, come on, lads. I know the Germans maybe, but there's something about Argentina. We got to beat them.
Yeah.
We got to do it. Come on, lads.
It should say we're now more than aware, by the way, just to go back to Maradona, why he did run and act so fast. But that's another story, isn't it? So, yeah, those press conferences were hard to follow.
What an allegation.
It's going to be a beauty. Listen, great work, Oscar. Always good to have you on. Thank you, Oscar Redrop, former Number 10 advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister. He knows all about what it's like to be in a rickety government. His thoughts on events of the day, 0344 499 1000. That question, should politicians have more protection? I mean, it's a very simple question. We appreciate the no political motive thing is the line from the Devon and Cornwall police at the moment. Counter-terrorism police have taken over the inquiry. We'll, I suppose, over the coming hours, perhaps learn more as to why that is. Steve says, on freedom of speech, we always used to have it, but when someone had died, the old maxim came of, you don't talk ill of the dead. What we've seemed to have fostered now is the abuse of FOS. No one benefits from the new right to offend, says Steve. Thank you, Steve, for that. And Rick in West Yorkshire says, are the Labour Party so stupid they would think that to get rid of Starmer, possibly the most hated PM ever, in exchange for another virtual clone of Starmer, who will become the next most hated Prime Minister ever, but somehow be the end of all their problems? Yeah, I think they are. I think somebody thinks it's going to be great. All the mood music at the moment suggests a horror show is coming our way. I hope we are proved wrong on all. A lot of it is speculative, I get that. I hope we're wrong. We all want to see our Prime Minister succeed for the country. And in a week's time, the new journey, the new chapter begins. 0344 499 1000. More to come on that. So we've reached a point where being a public figure is quite dangerous, no matter who you are, but in particular with politicians. Now, there might not be a correlation with Ann Widdecombe's views or thoughts. And by the way, you know, I think if you went round the streets with a clipboard, there'd be quite a lot of people who are not really familiar with necessarily Ann Widdecombe and certainly not her inner thoughts on issues of the day. And that's fair enough. So I don't think she'd be seen as a totemic target for a certain political voice. I don't sense that. 0344 499 1000. Thoughts on all of that? Lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 2. Rick says, the police have said at the moment it's not politically motivated. I don't trust the police's word anymore, and it makes you wonder if it had been someone on the left that had been murdered, would they say the same? Wokey left police force not to be trusted. I'd like to think that isn't the case, but I absolutely get why Rick would make that point. There is a sense that we've sort of lost trust in lots of institutions, rightly or wrongly, regardless of where you sit politically, whether it's politics, whether it's the police, the legal system. There's all sorts of areas where distrust is at a real high at the moment. It's interesting the police were quick to mention this, and then we have the news that counter-terrorism police have just taken over the investigation. Now, it doesn't necessarily therefore mean, well, there is political motivation, but you are forced into sort of re-questioning what this whole thing means. Let's speak with Philip Grindle, security and threat expert. Philip's a former Scotland Yard detective inspector and counter-terrorism specialist who protected the royal family, and he was handpicked by UK counter-terrorism to establish and lead the parliamentary threat assessment team following the 2016 assassination of MP Joe Cox. So this is a territory, Philip, that you know very, very well. Can I just start by asking, though, this this comment by the police that at the moment that there's nothing to suggest this was politically motivated, and then sort of a day or two later we hear that counter-terrorism police have now put in charge of this investigation following new information. Now, the two aren't necessarily connected. It could mean counter-terrorism police are involved, but there's still no political motivation. But you can understand why some people would say it does look a bit odd. Is there any way, without, I know we haven't got all the details, but is there any way you could explain that, what looks to many people as a bit of a contradiction?
Sure. Good afternoon. So there are different reasons why counter-terrorism policing may now be involved, one of which may be due to the publicity and the public interest around this. Devon and Cornwall may not have the resources to manage such an investigation, nor necessarily, and this isn't being detrimental to them, but nor necessarily the expertise and experience to manage such an investigation. We know that the suspect they've got in custody is from a different part of the country. So that causes all sorts of different issues around searching and all sorts of bits and pieces, and which sits outside of Devon and Cornwall's capacity. So it could be as simple as they needed extra resources, and therefore their local southeast counter-terrorism command has those resources. It could be that the Home Office and the Home Secretary has decided that that's what they want to happen. They want the CT policing to take over because they've got different resources and expertise. Or it may well be that they've identified something which leads it to be not necessarily terrorism, but potentially extremism that causes the CT side of things to have more expertise and experience in that matter.
Yeah. So it's a fine line, isn't it, between something being terror/extreme related and politically related. Some would say they're kind of the same thing. I mean, that grey bit in the Venn diagram is pretty narrow on that one, I would suggest.
Yeah, and often when a politician is attacked, it becomes a terrorist investigation because the ultimate charge may be coming under terrorist legislation. Yeah. And therefore, clearly, the CT policing would have better expertise around that. And even though Anne was or left Parliament 16 years ago, you know, you can still argue that she's been involved in politics. Yes. She's a member of a political party, and therefore that's why there may be this kind of political connection.
Gotcha.
But it doesn't mean it's necessarily a terrorist attack.
Just talk us through, Philip, if you would, the kind of threat to MPs. Now, by definition, if you're an MP, and particularly if you're a member of the governing party, and particularly if you're a member of the inner circle, as in the cabinet of a government party, there's obvious reasons why the security threat around you might increase, and we understand that. I think 5 or possibly 6 official departments, obviously including the Prime Minister, always have armed protection with them as a matter of course, whether you're the Northern Ireland Secretary, whether you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer. These are roles that require that level, and that's been the case for pretty much ever. So we understand all of that. We also understand that in the past there's been threats like the IRA, and we lost politicians to those threats back in the day. But then something sort of seemed to change in 2016 with the murder of Joe Cox. Now, we can talk about this being isolated. We know it's not quite, whilst not common, it's not sadly isolated. What is your sense as somebody who's worked in this area that was going on there? Have we just arrived in an era of extremism where everyone's losing their mind because someone has a different political view? Is there something else going on?
So, no, and I've actually written on this subject and studied it. So we actually go back before Joe Cox, in actual fact, because if things changed around 2010, Stephen Timms was attacked. Yep. And that was a terrorist attack by an Islamist extremist who attacked him because of her beliefs around what was going on in the war in Iraq and everything else. What we need to be looking at is, we got 650 MPs. Over the last 26 years, arguably 5 of them have actually been attacked. So the likelihood of a member of parliament being physically attacked is still pretty low.
Yep.
Within that, we've had 2 or 3 fatalities, and then that's not to be dismissed. The interesting thing when you look at attacks on MPs is they have never been personal. Joe Cox wasn't attacked for something she said. Stephen Timms wasn't attacked for something he said. David Amess wasn't attacked for something he said. They were attacked because what they represented, which was the state. And to the person that's attacking them, and if you take out the David Amess scenario for a moment, every attack is being conducted by a local constituent. Yeah. So it's not about politics either. It's about you represent the state, and I'm unhappy around, I've got a grievance with what's happening geopolitically. So we need to be quite clear around, the motives around why the politicians have been attacked. What we then have, which is a whole separate piece, is the abuse, the threats, the intimidation of MPs, which is what, when I went in 2016 post Joe Cox, we were investigating all of those, and they were horrific. They were epidemic in terms of the volume, but they're not physically threatening. And where people get very confused and sometimes use it to manipulate the story is that what we know is that people who make threats very rarely pose threats. If we look at all the people the MPs that have been physically attacked, none of those people were threatened by the person that attacked them.
Yeah.
The people that make threats are doing it for very different reasons, whether it's, they could be saying, we hear very often, not just politicians, but other public figures and celebrities saying, I've had a death threat. The reality is those people rarely, if ever, do anything, because if you look at a threat, is about intent and capability. Mm-hmm. When they're making those threats, it's not because they are coming to, they're not telling you, their intention is not to warn you they're coming to kill you. Their intent is around intimidation, causing you fear, causing you anxiety. Certainly when I was there, when it was the Brexit debates, some of the MPs that were getting all those threats would be saying to me, we've got a Brexit debate this evening and a vote. I'm thinking about not voting with my conscience because of the abuse I'm going to get. Yeah. So you can see there how the intimidation has worked. You can see how the intimidation has caused lots of MPs to stand down from being MPs.
And of course, I was just going to add, Philip, that the perception has a nasty habit of becoming reality, doesn't it? So you're right, statistically, the stats bear out exactly what you've just said. But of course, if you are the individual MP, you understand why, and I think I'm right in saying Stephen Timms was attacked in his constituency office. We know that David Amos was as well. Joe Cox was in the street, but yes, so the others were. So that sense that you need to have some kind of, bouncer almost at the door, or, you take some kind of alarm with you, or you don't even do them anymore. You do them virtually rather than face-to-face.
Well, what I would say to you is that since 2016, there's been a huge security programme that has been implemented. Now, there's a programme called Operation Bridget, which actually was in force before Joe Cox was killed. And Operation Bridget, which I ran, is the protective security measures that all politicians get, all elected MPs get in the UK. And they all get the same. It's a standard package of security measures to protect their homes, their constituency offices and their surgeries. If it's identified there is additional threats or additional risk to them, they then can get additional security. Now, increasingly what they've got is a personal security person. Some like to call it a bodyguard, but it's a personal security person. We need to be really careful about the effectiveness of that. Yeah. Because actually the research also tells us that fixated people are not in the slightest bothered by having a bodyguard or protective security. Sure. It didn't stop Reagan getting attacked. Yeah. And he was, surrounded by heavily armed people.
The most protected man in the world, arguably.
Exactly. Yeah. So what we need to, so the whole concept is around what's called layered security. Mm-hmm. So if you take the MP at the middle of this, we're looking at we're trying to stop people getting to that MP in the first place. And so what we're doing is we put all the security measures in place to protect them at their homes and surgeries, because any attacker, it's a targeted attack. What they have to have is predictability. They have to know where you are at any certain time in order to attack you, which is why all the MPs that have been attacked at specific locations, normally during a surgery, because people know they're there. In fact, what's happened quite often is they've made an appointment to see the MP. Mm-hmm. So Stephen Timms and David Amos have made an appointment to see both those MPs and then attack them. Yeah. So that's around that. So the idea of you're going to have a bodyguard who's going to save you is not true. Secondly, you need to have proper protective intelligence. And that isn't an intelligence company just producing loads of data around who's threatening you, because they're not the ones that are going to attack you. You need to understand what are the indicators you're looking for. What are the people who do attack public figures? What do they do? What do they leak? What behaviours do they carry out? Because there's been huge research. The US Secret Service did a lot of research. That's who taught us. That's why we were able to stop the attack on Rosie Cooper, because we identified those behaviours. So you need to have intelligence that actually picks up on those behaviours, that's able to say, this person's a problem.
Just a final point then, Philip. What do you think when I mean, the obvious example is somebody like Nigel Farage, who said that, and there's been this sort of campaign, I don't know how official it's been, but I think his party have asked the Home Office for assistance in security. He has some level of security around him. I think they are personally hired by the party. His point, which is, you know, we've seen people in the street try to attack him. He's had to run into pubs. He's had the milkshake thrown over him. OK, it turned out to be a McDonald's medium strawberry milkshake. Could have been battery acid, who the hell knows. Not for the first time he's experienced that. He would seem like somebody who would qualify for extra security. What is your independent view as somebody who works in this area?
Well, I think a lot of what he's been referring to recently is online abuse and threats, etc., which we've just discussed, and how that doesn't translate into an actual attack. You know, what we have to recognise is there's a huge difference between someone throwing a milkshake on you and someone trying to kill you. And so the girl, you know, who threw a milkshake on it did it for publicity reasons. So we know that. So if you're going to have a security team, if you look at, and I used to work in this department, if you look at the Royal Protection Teams, for example, they don't just turn up when there's an event. You know, there's a whole lot of reconnaissance goes on beforehand. There's elements in the crowd looking around you, seeing, is there somebody here that's got a drink out, that's behaving odd? So if your strategy is to have a couple of big guys who are bodyguards or whatever you want to call them, that's a pretty unprofessional way to manage your security, because that's not going to stop something. You need to have the proper intelligence, protective intelligence that goes with it. You need to have proper security that know what they're doing. You need to be being able to communicate where your events are, where you're going to be, so they can go and research and recce and get in there and actually deal with what's going to happen potentially. You know, so, but what we have to fall back on is this. If anybody really believes that the state has this intelligence that Nigel Farage's life is in danger, and then they're not going to provide him security, that's just not how it works. You know, we've heard a lot about Ravik recently with Prince Harry and other people. You know, I've been involved in that process with other MPs. You know, if there is a threat against an MP, no one's going to ignore that. It's just not how it operates. And so all MPs operate under a climate of fear and intimidation. That is a fact. That is why there is processes within Parliament to manage those processes and investigate those issues. But that's a long step away from someone who has a threat to his life or her life.
What about, just on that point then, Philip, just for, again, finally, Prince Harry, would he not just qualify by dint of being the King's son and about as high profile as it gets?
Well, again, you know, there are, you know, I've actually seen some of the threat assessment around that, because I was involved in that more recently when a different media company sent me his threat assessment. I've seen that threat assessment. That will never, ever get you protection. 90% of what they're talking about is historical. You know, loads of people talk about what's happened to so-and-so, you know, before. That's kind of irrelevant. It's what's the threat now. And with respect to Prince Harry, he employs private security elsewhere in the world, armed security, because he lives in the US. What he's after is armed security here. And what we have to understand is there are lots and lots of ways which we mitigate a threat from a person before we go to armed security. Armed security is the very last resort. And if you are going to get attacked, and however good your armed security is, they are basically only there for the last 30 seconds when somebody suddenly does something. So relying on that is not the best practice to have. That is just part of a protection schedule or strategy. But again, you know, if Prince Harry's clearly had his security review by the Home Office and security services and everyone else, if there was intelligence to suggest his life was in danger, there's no way in the world he would not be given armed protection.
Got it. Philip, really fascinating speaking. Let's speak again, sir. Thank you. Philip Grindell, who's the security and threat expert. He's worked right in the epicentre of these kind of stories. He knows his way around every element of it, handpicked by UK counter-terrorism to establish and lead the parliamentary threat assessment. This follows the murder of Joe Cox, but involved heavily even before that. Thank you to him. Over to you, 0344 499 1000.
thought about it hard, and I've decided today I will resign as a Member of Parliament for Clacton-on-Sea, thereby forcing a by-election.
Count Binface apparently is now 5-1.
Brilliant.
You know, so look, I mean, you know, if I were being flippant, I'd say Count Binface's campaign is now well and truly up and running, and Reform are struggling to put a lid on it.
Let me be absolutely clear. I have done nothing wrong. I have not broken the law.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Collins. It's always bad when you're called Collins. You don't think Ann Widdecombe would be a target for her Conservative views? What a bloody idiot you are. Have you heard of Charlie Kirk? Yes, I've heard of Charlie Kirk. I don't think Ann Widdecombe sits in the same sphere of contention or controversy in any shape or form as Charlie Kirk, and that in no small part due to the fact that Charlie Kirk was a global phenomenon who would sell out universities, campuses and stadiums the size of Wembley on a regular basis. So yes, of course, you can have a threat to someone who's a Conservative. I don't put Anne in that category. Anne was a contributor to some shows. Most of those shows, I would suggest the average, unless that person is engaged in something heavily, and Anne or someone in a similar position had said something that so perfectly hit the solar plexus of an individual who was so affronted by that one thing. But her views were pretty mainstream. I don't think anybody, whenever we got Ann Widdecombe on, which was every few weeks on this programme, Anne would speak to us. There was nothing ever really, it's like, oh my God, you won't believe what Ann Widdecombe said. I mean, it was pretty standard stuff. She was not known, she had her own views on gay marriage and things like that, but that's long been, I don't think that's ever been discussed for a decade. So it's always possible, of course. But yes, I'm happy to correct our anonymous texter there. I wouldn't accept the equivalence to begin with. Let's go over here to Peter in Liverpool. What have you got for us, Peter? Good afternoon to you.
Hi. I just wanted to make a comment about the vile comments being made about Ann Widdecombe.
Yeah.
They're not only comments, they're videos as well.
Yeah.
And I don't understand when I see every day videos of people being arrested, possibly in the middle of the night, for far less, for so-called hate-y words.
It's a good point, yeah.
I don't know, a good point. The police should be overrun today with all these lefties.
But what do you do? How would you charge somebody with that? I mean, I agree with you, but how would you? You know, the gene pool wouldn't be any poorer if these people weren't in it, right?
No.
So I'm with you 100%, but I don't know what you charge them with.
Ian, I watched a video yesterday where a guy was preaching in the middle of the street somewhere, and a police officer went up to him and warned him he was going to be arrested because he was hurting people's feelings who were watching him. This is ridiculous. And we've got someone like Ann Widdecombe who has been murdered, and these vile, abhorrent comments that are being made, they make me so angry that nothing's being done about it. And, you know, I heard somebody saying about security for MPs.
Yeah.
And how they protect our democracy. Well, I'm afraid this government is responsible for the erosion of our democracy. I think what they're about to do with the algorithms on YouTube and other places to censor what we see, how can we condone giving these people... These are the people that have given us the problems.
These people are vile, but of course... As far as they're concerned, I mean, if somebody wrote something bad about Saddam Hussein or Hitler or Chairman Mao, we wouldn't say this stuff. But you've got to remember, these half-wits, Peter, see politicians who have different views. They put them in the same category. So as far as they're concerned, they're punching up to people who are as bad and as horrific as some of the people I just mentioned. So to them, it's not a bad thing. It's just Ann Widdecombe. She was a vile, horrible, bigoted woman. That's what they say. Mostly based on the fact that she was a bit unconventional and looked like a strict school teacher.
I think some of the people on the left are far more evil and have far more intent than most of the people on the right are law-abiding and will just let it go over their head, what people say.
100%.
The majority on the left are not like that.
I agree. Yeah, no, I get it. Peter, you're bang on. Thank you, mate, for that, for starting us off. Peter in Liverpool. I just want to bring you this. Rupert Lowe has just tweeted, "The death of Ann Widdecombe is deeply distressing. I do not know the full circumstances or motivations, but it looks to be an act of appalling and wicked evil. I'm calling on Parliament and the Home Office to provide MPs who've received credible death threats to receive proper state-funded security. That absolutely includes Nigel Farage, Reform MPs and any other politician who's been threatened in a way that is beyond the usual social media insults. I myself received countless death threats and arrests have been made because of those. Personally, I found Parliament's response to be unacceptably relaxed about it all. It seems Reform feel the same." I agree. That's interesting for a number of reasons. You did hear our former expert on this field who said that thorough due diligence is done on these cases. If it's found, it's given. If it's not, it isn't. 0344 499 1000. Lines are open. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Afternoon. Yes, welcome to the home of common sense. A couple of things we're exploring here. Should politicians have more protection? Counter-terrorism police have now taken over the investigation into the killing of Ann Widdecombe after fresh evidence came to light. This reignites urgent questions over the safety and protection afforded to politicians and other public figures. Although you heard from our counter-terrorism expert just before the news that counter-terrorism taking over isn't in of itself evidence that there is a political motivation behind it. But we will find out in due course, and I would imagine that certainly in the next, well, you would expect hours, but certainly in the next 24, there'll be some movement on the man they are currently questioning over the murder of Ann Widdecombe. Also this afternoon, Andy Burnham facing demands to appear before MPs before the summer recess. Conservatives branding it unacceptable that Britain's next Prime Minister could enter Downing Street without ever facing scrutiny from the House of Commons. It's a week today. He'll be sworn in for the big gig, by which time they'll be on their holidays. So there'll be absolutely no chance to scrutinise Mr Burnham until after summer recess. That does seem all shades of wrong. And Ollie Robbins has launched legal action against the government over his sacking as Britain's top Foreign Office diplomat. You remember the story well. He's seeking a judicial review after Downing Street blamed him for failing to flag Lord Mandelson's vetting failure ahead of his ambassadorial appointment. Thoughts on that as well? Unfair dismissal? Seems that way. 0344 499 1000. On a lighter note, this comes from Mark, who says Argentina need to win against England, otherwise there'll be a complete meltdown down there and calls to reinvade the Falklands. If we win, we'll gloat and hurl insults. It won't be pretty. It's a good point. So you're saying we have almost a security duty to not win. Well, we could always play that card if we lose, couldn't we? Go, no, the boys did it for the Falklanders. That's what Harry could have given it large down there at the mouth, but he decided not to, just to save the islands. Who knows? And this one from Richard Burnham, more or less self-elected Prime Minister, and you wonder why the population don't trust MPs and politicians. Yes, it's a huge quirk in our system that, of course, Andy Burnham is even going to be the Prime Minister, but the PM he will be in a week's time. That's just days after Parliament breaks up for a 6-week recess. Now, the Tories are calling this unacceptable. They want Labour to delay the break by one sitting day so that MPs can actually question him on his plans before he vanishes, legs it into the pool, quite literally, of politicians' summer break. And it's a long one. Whatever happens, the next Prime Minister is right around the corner.
Strange thing to say, but I've just been in to nominate myself to be leader of the Labour Party. The nomination process has opened this morning, so glad to see some MPs going in. I'm still the only candidate in the race. We'll get the first indication about 7 p.m. tonight of the first number of MPs to sign up, but the thing will go on over the next few days, so it won't be the final word. But yeah, it's all starting to feel very real.
Yeah, he's speaking like he's just won a competition somewhere, like there's some sort of X factor. Oh, yes, I'm about to get the deal. I think we might have it over the line. All feeling rather real, like he's some kind of new kid on the block. He's literally the definition of an establishment professional politician. Let's speak to Annunziata Rees-Mogg on this and a few other stories as well. Good afternoon to you. I don't know about, I mean, you know, you do, I think what I do is once in a while you have to put a cushion before you look at social media. But every now and again these Andy Burnham videos pop up and they're all a little bit cringy. And, well, like the one you just saw, oh, I'm just normal Andy, and, oh, it's all feeling a bit real. And it's like, no, you've been there for years, mate. Yeah.
It all feels like play acting, like a child dressing up in their parents' clothes and being the grown-up. He's been planning for this for years, doesn't seem to know what he wants to do, and it seems to me that the Labour Party could have closed nominations 1 or 2 days earlier so that we didn't end up in this situation. But the idea they close nominations on the very day that Parliament goes on recess so that he cannot face questions, because Keir Starmer has to go to the King the following day and tender his resignation formally, and then, of course, Andy Burnham has to go and see the King and say, I have the confidence, which we all know will happen.
Yep.
But we won't get to hear anything from him till September, because also under parliamentary rules, you're meant to tell Parliament first of any big announcements.
Yes.
And if there's no Parliament there, he can't tell us anything. The whole country is in limbo.
It's curious, isn't it? But it will suit Andy Burnham just fine. And he and his team, including political heavyweight and overarching intellect of Westminster, Louise Hay, between them, they'll be able to sit down and crunch the numbers and work out a plan over the summer. So the time that it was often said, well, you know, how is he going to get time to put a government together and do all the normal things? I guess he's now bought himself 6 weeks.
He has, but this country doesn't have 6 weeks. We can't sit around with a government that doesn't exist. I mean, we've got no idea who will be the Chancellor. I'm the daughter of a journalist, and I'm sure you know yourself that the number of times some massive story breaks in August, and every journalist has to go rushing back, no matter where they're are at the time. For us, it was always Somerset, but other people had to come from further abroad to make sure they could cover the story. But the politicians were the ones who had to deal with it. And we have got a Prime Minister, as of, well, at the moment, but also as of next week, in name only. And no government behind that, no departments running as they should be because there are no ministers to head them. That this is completely undemocratic, and he should, of course, have to face the scrutiny of the House of Commons. He's managed to dodge it repeatedly with journalists. So his press conference where no questions were allowed, taking them on some social media site where he could pre-plan which ones to answer, which ones to ignore, and just take the soft, easy questions. He hasn't faced scrutiny from the public. He hasn't faced scrutiny from Parliament. This is completely undemocratic.
It is undemocratic indeed.
But they probably do get to benefit from slightly cheaper summer holidays because the state schools, as I know well, have not broken up on Thursday. So if they all fly off on Friday, they're quids in.
That's a very good point. There is that as well. I think I've mentioned this to you before. I know you were only a mini Rees-Mogg at the time when your dad was editing the Times. But, I mean, that must have been... I mean, it's a very exciting job, isn't it? And, you know, to be... I mean, certainly when print news was key to everything. And that's all, you know, I remember as a kid that you could see a newspaper at home in the morning, and then the next time you saw news was either at 6 in the evening or at 10 at night on the television. Now, of course, we're surrounded in it. So it no longer looks like it once did. It no longer looks like it did back in the day. I mean, how times have changed. I wonder what he would have made of how news is gathered these days.
Bizarrely, I think he'd have found it very exciting, although I think he would have regretted the loss of some of the professionalism because the speed inevitably loses some of the accuracy, some of the checking. But we all want news as it happens. We're all hungry to hear what's going on as it emerges. And so some of those checks and balances, I think, have been lost. But Dad loved new technology. He couldn't use it, didn't understand it, but absolutely loved how the world constantly progressed and would have enjoyed no end having access to news 24 hours a day properly, as we now do.
I have to say, I would have paid to see him on Twitter. I mean, that would have been... there would have been no, very politely, but I'm sure astutely and always intellectually getting it kind of spot on with some of those wry, dry comments.
Certainly dry. I think Sir Alexander Pope and the like might have got more airing on Twitter than they do now.
Let's look at this story in Ziata. This is, I mean, it's almost chapter 7,205 of the Channel, the English Channel story that just keeps on giving if you're a migrant trying to get into the UK. A record 128 people crossed the Channel on one boat. This is the largest ever recorded number to make the journey in a single vessel. I would imagine, aside from anything else, I don't know how big this thing was, pretty huge, but I would take a punt without fully knowing that this is probably rather dangerous as well for those people on it.
I'm going to assume it was pretty overcrowded, but we do also know that the people smugglers have increased the sizes of the boats, and what was originally a small boats crisis rapidly expanded from boats that took about 20 to boats that took 40 to 50. And now we're seeing one boat can take 128. Your listeners and viewers will remember Keir Starmer going over to China and doing a deal with them that they wouldn't supply the parts. That whole process had already left China because they were going for these bigger boats. And we knew it was coming. We're now seeing it in action and overcrowded. And yes, the numbers are down, but that's still 12,000 people have come over the Channel this year. And as the boats get bigger, those numbers will likely increase. It shows the confidence they've got in their process.
Indeed, and the fact that this, I'm just going to really repeat what I always tend to say on these things, the fact that this no longer, I was about to say no longer makes the front pages, it hardly makes any pages now. And if this was an airport where 128 people had tried to jump the barriers at Heathrow, you'd have the world's press in helicopters filming the scene. The country would be closed down. There'd be armed cops all over the place. It would be absolutely huge. If you do it in a rubber boat, apparently nobody much cares anymore.
No, and I always like to put these numbers into perspective, that my children are at a local village primary school and it's got 130 pupils at it. That is an entire school's worth of people on one boat. And they are coming here and they will need somewhere to live, and we'll have to give them benefits because we're jolly nice like that over here. And we won't get rid of them. And we unfortunately know this. We know the statistics on the number that claim asylum and the number that get it. And the vast majority will stay here.
Yeah, without doubt, and that is a proven fact, as we know. It does rather tie into this story, and I thought we'd seen the end of this. This is also involving migrants, but from a slightly different angle, and arguably just as confusing. Migrant shantytown returns to the West End. This is down in London. Rough sleepers from Eastern Europe set up camp next to London's famous Marble Arch and take to the streets to beg and pickpocket tourists. Now, this was a story a few years ago, if you remember, and then it sort of went away. And I remember a couple of times being in that neck of the woods in London and seeing this kind of tented village, thinking, well, firstly, visually, this is an absolute disgrace. Can the Westminster Council, one assumes that's still under, would do something about that? And then it kind of disappeared. It appears it's back again.
Well, I remember when this sort of started, driving down, I drive down Park Lane a couple of times a week on my way to and from London, and seeing it absolutely filled. And it wasn't just tents, it was barbecues, it was outdoor seating, they had an entire community set up there. And to credit where it's due, I remember Chris Philp going and filming there and getting slightly threatened by them to go away. But it did seem to immediately, more or less immediately, within a week, it had gone. And then every single week I would see security guards patrolling it. A van would be parked up saying police dogs, and they went. And there was no more sight of them.
Yeah.
And they're back. And unfortunately, Labour has just decriminalised sleeping rough. So I don't know what powers the police will now even have to remove them this time. But I do know that I went to Oxford Street, very sadly. It's a horrible place to go nowadays. I had to collect something from Primark last Thursday, and there were beggars on every single block. In the time I was in Primark, they had switched over and new beggars were in their places. Yep. This is an absolute operation. They all have identical handwritten signs on pieces of cardboard, but word for word the same. It is all one big organisation. And as I walked past Selfridges, there were people handing out free Qurans. I'm not entirely sure why. You could get them in Arabic or in the English translation. And I heard someone walking past me saying, this is all a front for pickpocketers. And I felt genuinely unsafe. For the rare occasion, I took a piece of jewellery off and put it in a pocket. I've never done that in daylight in London in my life.
That's pretty sad and a very real experience. It kind of just feeds into a final point. We're talking on a wider issue, Anziata, about protection for politicians and whether high-profile politicians, be they past or present, and when I say past, Ann Widdecombe, of course, was a Home Office minister. She hadn't served as an MP for some time. She was an MEP, but remained deeply political. It was in her DNA throughout all of that time. We don't know the full circumstances. Police say at the moment there's nothing to link it to some kind of political attack. However, it naturally throws up that question that does come up on a fairly regular basis, and it's perhaps fueled with by the aforementioned social media, which has sort of added booster rockets to the world of offence and threat. I'm sure hardly ever carried out, but nonetheless it's written down, which is scary for some people. Do we need to rework or rethink the safety of politicians, or does that in some respects, because I sense also, I understand it, but the purity, if you like, of our system is that you can turn up, I mean, you can actually turn up at the House of Commons and ask to see your MP. It's advisable to tell them you're coming, but you can do it. Surgeries in the constituency, I love that. I love the fact that, you know, especially if you're your MP is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister can't always do their own surgeries, but once in a while they will. John Major used to throw a good shift in on the surgeries from time to time. And I thought that was fantastic, that you turn up with a drain problem and the person sitting opposite you is the Prime Minister. How brilliant is our democracy? But it's being tested right now.
It does need that openness, I think, in order to work. But we need our politicians to feel safe, and we need the next generation of politicians to feel that they can go into politics safely, that this has knock-on effects with who will stand and who will be put off. And I think it can be extremely frightening. My brother is ridiculously, I think, in my view, over blasé on this and completely believes it is the public's right to talk to him. Well, when he was an MP, he is no longer, and refused to hide behind police escorts and that sort of thing. But I think we've got to have a case by case rather than a blanket. At the moment, it's senior ministers and the Prime Minister and former Prime Ministers, and that's it.
Yeah.
But actually, you do get people such as Nigel Farage who have a completely separate profile to just where their job title might land them. And there are people who do, for views on various issues, attract more hostility. And I think the police really have to look carefully with the parliamentary authorities as to who, past and present, as you say, does need much stronger security, and having their houses checked, or having those emergency button alarms so that you're immediately alerting the local police station. Those sorts of measures, I think, should be more widely spread.
Agreed. Annunziata, great to have you on again. Thank you. Annunziata Rees-Mogg, she is, of course, head of comms with Popular Conservatism, also former MEP as well. Thank you to her. Over to you on all of this. Should politicians have more protection? Lines are open. This is Talk.
I've thought about it hard, and I've decided today I will resign as a Member of Parliament for Clacton-on-Sea, thereby forcing a by-election.
Count Finface apparently is now 5-1. Brilliant. You know, so look, I mean, you know, if I were being flippant, I'd say Count Finface's campaign is now well and truly up and running, and Reform are struggling to put a lid on it.
Let me be absolutely clear. I have done nothing wrong. I have not broken the law.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Talking about immigration, Derek in Hertfordshire says immigration. Tony Abbott, that should be. Donald Trump in America stopped it in 1 week. Viktor Orban in Hungary, don't let it start. Hungary hasn't entirely stopped immigration. Hungary can't stop people from other EU countries entering Hungary in that sense. So it's a nuanced story. But they've done much better than pretty much anyone else. Derek says, the UK does not want to stop it. You are literally forced to ask that question. This one in from Brad in Cambridge. I've always maintained that those on the left of politics are by far the nastiest. You only have to look at the reaction in British universities when Charlie Kirk was killed. They call us fascists, but they are the real cancer in politics. R.I.P. Anne. Thank you, Brad, for that. And there's a reason for that, and it comes back to the point I made to... I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was our caller before the news. Because on the left, they believe they're punching up, not down. They genuinely believe that they occupy a moral territory. So their opposition to someone is not just a political opposition. It's a thoroughly solid, and they would argue, intellectually motivated position. So they are on the... They occupy the moral kind of high ground and really believe it. So when they have a pop at a Tory, or now reform politicians, restore politicians, have kind of overtaken that territory. So the Tories are probably thinking, well, it's not us anymore they're arguing against. As far as they're concerned, they might as well be having a pop at Adolf Hitler. I mean, literally that. They don't say, oh, I disagree with Nigel Farage. This vile, evil, horrible man, nasty, racist, all of these kind of pejoratives and insults that are as awful as it can be. Far worse than a bit of swearing, which is not pleasant, by the way. Not good to tell the grandkids what you called a politician you disagree with. But the other stuff. So they really believe this. And because they believe it, they haven't done anything wrong. They haven't done anything wrong. Why is there anything wrong with having a pop at an old Tory? That should be a rite of passage. And they believe that nonsense. They genuinely think they're up against some kind of fascist regime. And all the while they think that, it's very easy for them to be what you would call evil. Jason in Wiltshire. Jason, what have you got for us? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. Thank you for taking the call again.
It's a pleasure. Fire away.
Well, it was like obviously away at the weekend. It was just sort of reflecting on with Ann Widdecombe. What the hell is going on in politics now for 79-year-old women to be killed? Years ago, you used to get, the odd death threat, with a little letter stuck off the bits off the back of the cornflakes packet, where they used to stick the words on, I'm going to kill you. What is going on? Why has it come to this? What? It might be something you can answer. This is what I sort of asked, I said to your producer, why do you think this is happening? Because it's, I just want to know, your thoughts on it as well, as in why this has happened.
I don't know.
And why politics is going the way that it is.
Well, people often...
It never used to be.
No, people often point to social media as being the facilitator of all the anger and all the rest of it. So people who previously would have sat at home going, I don't like this politician, I hate this politician, they're an arse and they're this, that and the other. And they would have just had their own view. If you start to throw in the original chat rooms and then later social media, these people suddenly discover, oh, actually, there's loads of people that think like I think, and then suddenly there's an echo chamber, and that echo chamber, left-wing or right-wing, will then grow. And it will grow to the point that, as I mentioned before, having a pop at somebody you fundamentally disagree with is no bad thing. So you can call them whatever you want, because in your mind, they're evil. So you can call them anything. It doesn't matter. You can threaten to kill them. You can, badger them. You can harass them, scare them in the middle of the night, do anything you like, because they're hate figures. And that's the only area that I can really think has boosted it to this level, Jason.
Yeah, no, I think I can sort of see what you mean. But, I mean, years ago, like you said, you'd get the odd heckle, or you'd have, someone would throw an egg at politician.
You get egged, and there'd be somebody outside with a placard, and once in a while somebody might put dog poo through your constituency letterbox.
But it's just, like I said, it is so far divided now. We just hear, I mean, Peter was one earlier, the left side, the right side, the left side. This is like gangland warfare now. You almost look at this, how it goes. Politics should not be like this. I mean, go back in the days of the Labour and the old Conservatives. You had the left and the right, but it was nothing like this. For example, it's dangerous now. It is just gangland territory. It's a great way to put it. Anything else.
It's gangland territory. If Keir Starmer Keir Starmer is a pretty woeful politician. He's not a very good politician, and he's certainly not a very good he's just not very good at being Prime Minister. I think that's a reasonable criticism. I don't think there's there's nothing personal about my view on that. By all accounts, he is, in his private life, reasonable bloke, family man, all of that. I get that. But I just think he's just hopeless as a Prime Minister. Now, if this was 20 years ago, Jason, and we didn't have the sort of 24-hour news cycle along with social media, I wonder if I would have that same judgment as I do now.
You may do, but not to possibly the same extent. I mean, we would still see, without social media, how incompetent he is. And did you know he's the son of a toolmaker?
No way.
I heard on he's the son of a toolmaker.
Why would you not mention that at the beginning of this call, Jason? If you're going to give us breaking news, you should do it right at the top. You've teased us throughout.
Question for you, Ian. I'm ever so sorry, but you need to know that in a pub quiz.
It's good to know.
Yeah, as a 79-year-old lady, a lady that couldn't defend herself. I mean, if you went after somebody, you shouldn't go after anybody, but say somebody like Lee Anderson, big bloke, he could probably handle himself. But to go and target a 79-year-old lady in her own home, it's wrong, and I just really do not know what this world is coming to. It's just basically it's sick.
It is, of course it is sick. And Jason, thank you for that. I hear it in your voice. Thank you, by the way, for that lovely little factoid that Keir Starmer was the son of a toolmaker. His old man made tools. Well, we've seen the evidence. This in from Rick, who says, the police have said at the moment it's not politically motivated. I don't trust the police's word anymore. It makes you wonder if it's been someone on the left had been murdered. Oh, I think I did read this. Would they say the same? Like I say, I think whatever the police are saying, they'd end up with a lot of egg on their face if it turned out that it was obviously politically motivated. To say that it wasn't, I think at the moment, their point was at this point in the investigation, there is nothing to show that. I do find it rather interesting that we have... When was this guy arrested, Finn? Because obviously there was one arrest and he was very quickly released. He was re-arrested today, which is part of the extension of holding somebody. When was he first arrested, this guy? Was it Saturday? I'm tempted to say... Or was it Friday he was originally arrested? So there was one guy arrested to start with. He was released, and then there's another guy. So the guy that they're now holding, I think that was Saturday, wasn't it? I think it was Saturday. No, the guy that's arrested now, the guy that's in there now was arrested on Saturday, right? So they've had him for 2 days, and they haven't yet charged anyone. So that's what's kind of interesting. We will see. Also, some breaking news. 12 people have been arrested as part of an investigation into an extreme right-wing terror threat against an Islamic event in Suffolk last weekend. This is according to counter-terrorism police. Details on that to come. Just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
This one comes from John in Blackpool. If politicians' actions have made the country so unsafe, then surely any security should be paid for by themselves. But then you have to kind of get into the territory of, you know, is it somebody's fault because they have a view that somebody disagrees with? What would politicians' actions look like? You are more likely, as our previous counter-terrorism guest said, to have a situation where someone's... David Amos is a good example. Stephen Timms is a good example. Stephen Timms survived a knife attack in his constituency, and David Amos didn't. Both the perpetrators of those attacks had fundamental issues against government positions, if you like. So it wasn't personal today. It wasn't David Amos thinks that I don't know, dogs should never be used in racing or something. It wasn't like that. It was much bigger, and no amount of security would have stopped a determined offender at some level getting through. And how far do you take security? I mean, is it 24/7 wherever you go? I mean, the Prime Minister gets that. Some members of the Cabinet get that, but very few ever will. Now, the casting director behind the last 14 Bond films has settled the debate. Ian Fleming wrote a character, and that is the character who stays white, male and Bond.
I admire your courage, Miss...
Trench. Sylvia Trench. I admire your luck, Mr...
Bond. James Bond.
Look at him, the pasty old Watson. Let's speak to Steve N. Allen. Hello, Stevie. Steve N. Allen, broadcaster and comedian with us. How are you, Steve?
Yes, not bad treacle.
No, thank you very much. So it's always been a debate, isn't it? You know, do we have a black Bond? Do we have a female Bond, etc.? Do we change Goldfinger to Whitefinger? You know, all of those kind of debates. But here we are. It's now been settled that James Bond is a white bloke.
Yeah. So Debbie McWilliams, her point of view is that Ian Fleming wrote this as a character, as a white man character. Why do you need to change it? She also then admitted that she didn't read any of the books. But to be fair, I've not read any of the books, and I know who James Bond is. I think the question should be, why does it need changing? Because there can't be an argument about representation, because the character as written by Ian Fleming is this violent misogynist. Yes. So what's the message? We need to be saying, don't worry, black women can be violent misogynists too. So there's not an argument of representation. It feels odd, like in the grander scheme of things, I get that it doesn't matter. But why do you need to mess? Because it's not as if you've changed James Bond's gender and race, just change his name and look, you've made a new character. You very much can do, because it's not like there's a limit on the number of film characters. If there are only 3 and the activists were saying, can we have one of them as a black woman, please? Sure, you'll have that one. Charlie Chan's already taken. We've got a full panoply now. But instead, you can just make a new character. So given that you can do that, why do we have to tamper with James Bond? It does come across as a feeling of like, can we not have anything that's not been messed with? Can't you learn from Doctor Who? Can't you learn from Disney? Yes. It doesn't go well when they do this.
Yeah, it's true. You just put up an image of, you know, in the world of diversity, go back a few. Would Charles Hawtrey have been able to audition for the Charlie Chan role? You know, I mean, it would be ridiculous. We all know that. And as you rightly say, if you look at Disney, I mean, the idea that Mickey Mouse, you know, you're going to suddenly watch a movie, a Disney movie, and Mickey Mouse is going to be played by a duck. That would be stupid. I mean, that would be utterly ridiculous. There's already a duck in this franchise.
Yeah, a lame one. But given a lot of what Disney's been doing with its revamps and reboots of things, they've not cared about the audience. Now, if there is an audience out there for a female black James Bond, again, I just go back to change the name and make the film. You don't have to change old characters. I don't know why They think that there's only a certain number of things and they all have to be tweaked. And if the audience want it, then you make a film and they'll go and get it. But don't turn your back on the core audience that you actually have. Although you did say this has now been settled. It hasn't. The problem is this story, this Debbie McWilliams, is the legendary casting director who retired. So she's not in charge of who plays Bond now that Hamilton's got it. So at least Disney don't have it. Otherwise, we definitely know it would be played by, James Bond would be parking very near the shops. But with Amazon, who can tell?
I do find it interesting when people mess around with this stuff. Sometimes, I sort of get it. In theatre, for example, so the Old Vic Theatre right now has a production of Glengarry Glen Ross, famous stage play, and of course film as well. And it's an all-female cast. I only know this because a mate of mine went to see it. But the females are playing males. They haven't changed the names of the characters or any of the kind of pronouns or any of the language that is within it as well. And he said it was remarkable. He said it was brilliant. He said it was really, really good, and it kind of played with your mind a bit because you started seeing these female actors. Now, I kind of get that on a stage where an artistic director, a sort of lovey character, is going, I want to play around with the genre. It's what Mamet would have wanted. It's that kind of thing. They do it with Shakespeare quite a lot. I saw a Shakespeare... I've never got the whole Shakespeare thing, but I did go to the Globe once and saw Vanessa Redgrave knocking out some lines that I didn't understand, but I was willing to believe that it was me that didn't understand it. I'm in the Globe Theatre, it's where it all started, and I've got Vanessa Redgrave in front of me. This is big stuff, so no clue what was going on. They messed around with all sorts of men playing women and women playing men and black people playing white people and white people... No, they didn't do it that way round, but you take the point. So they had lots of stuff going on. But when it's in a film, or even TV, EastEnders love nothing more than taking the hard man of the whole piece, the hardest man, and turning him into a gay character or a transsexual or something, as if, that's something that everybody would instantly recognise. Now, they're doing that for political reason. They're doing that to go, it doesn't matter who you are. You could be gay, straight, trans, bi, LGBTQ, RST, you could be any of those things. Yeah. They're making a point, and I think with Bond, I don't know why it's hard to understand that Fleming wrote the character. If somebody wants to make a movie with a female Bond, go for it. I know what happened when they tried to make a female Ghostbusters cast, and that went off the plank and was never seen again. Now, I don't know whether that's because psychologically, audience just to show, they want to see Bill Murray with a Hoover on his back. They don't want to see anything other than that. Maybe it's a bit of that. You don't want to suddenly see a remake of Star Wars and discover that Darth Vader sounds like Janet Street Porter. It would be really odd. Although
it would ruin the line as well. He'd have to say, like, no, Luke, I am your mother. Which, Vader means father in German or something as well, so that would have been a plot twist.
Yeah.
I think Ghostbusters could work with a female cast, even though some people, I think that women would be afraid of ghosts, but it wasn't a good film. It wasn't a good film. And Shakespeare's an interesting one because originally it was dudes playing all the characters, wasn't it? They only had male actors back then. But you're right, that would be an arty thing, with some arty lovey making an art house film going, actually, it's a film where all the characters... That's great. Bond is not the art house film, especially when it's going to be a serialized thing on Amazon. We're not looking for some kind of playing with the genre and being meta. It's a spy who shoots at people. That's what it is. Now, if you want female spy shoots at people, make it. There are no restrictions on it. It doesn't need to be dabbled with. So I think it's valid to ask the question, why is it you want to make sure that you touch everything? Everything gets slightly messed with. Why can't we have some originals?
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say, based on my own experience, I've never, ever, ever once in my entire life met a female spy that goes around the world killing people. Ever. Not once. Not once.
Right. How many times have you met a male spy who goes around the world? Okay, but if we don't look at all the details...
You see what I'm saying? It's consistent. It's very strange. I'm going to ask you this, Steve, about, because people always say, who's the ideal Bond? I wonder whether... Does that question still resonate with younger audiences? Because people, I think, mostly have in their mind... Bond's a bit timeless, so you can still every now and again turn on the TV and you might just clock a Bond movie. Do I like Bond? I'm kind of all right with it. I don't think I've seen the last couple. I liked Daniel Craig. I thought he was really good.
Yes, he was good, but I also think everyone answers this question by like, what music do you love? It's what you're in your 20s and enjoyed, isn't it? That's so for me, Roger Moore, but that's probably because I was the right age to be watching those films. And look, they're barely serious films at that stage, are they? It was more comedy than anything else, raising an eyebrow, and all the women's names were basically double entendres.
I happened to catch a clip on Twitter the other day, which I think it was Melvin Bragg interviewing Sean Connery, obviously from years ago, about what he thought of Roger Moore, for example. And I thought, this is and it was really interesting to hear what he did with Bond and how, he said, Roger kind of took it to a different, more of a kind of comedic element to it, where his was a more of a serious role. And it was kind of interesting seeing that. But he did acknowledge that, different actors will bring different things to the role. But whether you change the colour or the gender of that person, I think the gender is trickier than anything, right?
Yeah, and again, it breaks. There are certain things like the original character in the books is not what you get in the Roger Moore versions, and not really what you get in the Timothy Dalton. No one can remember what George Lazenby did. Pierce Brosnan was very different. Even the Debbie McWilliams said he wasn't threatening enough to be the character. He looked more like he'd be apologising whilst shooting you.
Yeah, while singing an ABBA song.
Yeah. Oh, you've ruined it. Yeah, that mental image. But it's fine to play with the character, and the character can develop if you've got a good reason to do it. But because I can't think of a good reason to make this non-white female version of Bond. Because there are other, make a different character. I'm sure it would be a great character. But there's no part of the Bond story that needs that, is there? They're like, literally, he's struggled with issues of, like in the Daniel Craig ones, about the fact that he's out of his own era. He's a bit of a dinosaur. Well, if you were the most up-to-date, hip version of what a spy could be, all of that suddenly goes out the window.
You'd think so. It's kind of when something doesn't need to be done, I would imagine. And you'd have to, I suppose, film studio accountants and futurists that look at this kind of stuff. I would take a guess, Steve, that it would be a heck of a risk for a studio to change the fundamentals of James Bond.
Yeah. Well, look, it didn't work for Doctor Who, and that was a character that you obviously can change. Written into the fibre of Doctor Who is every so often, when he's about to die, he changes into someone completely different. So you've not got a better setup for having a woman at some stage. And that just did not go well. Not because it was, I think it was just a badly written version of the Doctor. But when you've got something as fundamental as James Bond, the misogynist spy, you move enough of those around, you've broken the mould. People who like James Bond won't be going to see the thing you've made. So you've lost your built-in audience. Then why have a franchise?
Well, let's just finish on this message. No name given on this one, Steve, but here it is. He says, it's definitely a he, says, I will repeat, 007 is a white, male, heterosexual, womanising, heavy-drinking, gambling agent. No problem with a black spy, call him 006, or a lesbian, 008, or a transgender spy, 009.5. But James Bond is 007, is a character which should not be messed with, says 008.
The texter is bang
It's
on.
from
There are
008,
other numbers.
Yes.
There are other numbers.
I would go and see the 008, I have to say. I mean, I'm just... I might try and get Premier tickets to me and Finn for that one. We'll have to see. Listen, Steve, good to have you on. Stephen Allen. Thank you, 008, for that. Stephen Allen, of course, comedian and broadcaster with us on the programme. No real reason to mess around with the Bond thing, is there? I mean, that is the whole kind of point of the Bond thing. And if you want to change it so fundamentally that it becomes something different, then good luck with that. I mean, if somebody wants to make what does a Bond movie cost? 100 million quid or something bizarre like that? Go for it if you think it's going to make money. But I'm just warning you now. Lines are open, just coming up to 10 to 3. We've got a brand new Voice of Doom on the way. How exciting, is that? Stand by right here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Daisy in Newport says James Bond is a terrible spy. He tells everyone his real name. Hopeless at staying secret. Says that's a very good point, actually. Well, you'd be kicked out, wouldn't you, within seconds? He doesn't just say it. I mean, he emphasises it. My name is Bond. James Bond, in case you haven't got them. It's my address. Right, Voice of Doom, just before we talk to Michael in Birmingham. Brand new voice. It's mystery voice time, of course. I know we're not inventing the wheel. It's just a little thing we do. But this time, we'll give you the answer in the next hour if somebody gets it correct. If they don't, it rolls over to the next day. So we're starting fresh with a brand new one. Very simple task. Your job is to guess, who is this?
I just don't think that's accurate.
I think that's tricky, but I often think it's tricky and approved very quickly wrong when somebody guesses it on the first or second day. Here it is again.
I just don't think that's accurate.
And again.
I just don't think that's accurate.
There's only one way to have a crack at this. 87222, that's 87222 if you think you know who this is.
I just don't think that's accurate.
A right answer means we reveal all after the news. If not, it rolls over to tomorrow. One more little sneaky listen.
I just don't think that's accurate.
There it is, 87222. Let's go to Michael in Birmingham. Michael, how are you doing?
Hi, Michael. Michael in Birmingham. I just wanted to say that I think that the protection for politicians is a good thing, but it needs to go to wider people on the right of the spectrum. I mean, I was going to stand for a local councillor for my area, and I chickened out because I thought people could track me down and, well, I was a bit scared of what might happen, to be quite honest.
And, of course, if you stand for public office, your home address is invariably public, so...
Yeah, and but I think it just needs to go, you know, OK, the high-profile politicians, they're always going to get security, but plenty of councillors have been attacked as well, reform councillors. You know, there's one or two that have had a bit of a beating. And also just in the day-to-day thing, I mean, you know, if you surface your reform, you ain't in your job very long. And you're pretty much open season. And there needs to be protection, you know, some protection that political views are not an excuse to attack people. Even throwing milkshakes, which I count as a very violent act, by the way, even verbal abuse and harassing you out of jobs, to me, they're serious criminal offences and should be prosecuted as such and people protected as such.
Yeah, I agree. But where do you... I mean, as our security guy said, I don't know if you heard him, Michael, but he was making the point that a lot of people say some terrible stuff on social media, but it very rarely goes beyond that.
Yeah, but I think some of it is like beyond the pale. I mean, and we're going to go back to this horrible two-tier term again. I mean, what some of the stuff that's been said by some very high-profile people, right, about Ann Widdecombe is beyond the pale, and they should be having knocks on doors. They should be, you know, that is hate speech.
But it is, well, it is hate speech. I suppose, I don't know, I'm trying to think aloud here. Does it change the fact that if the target is no longer alive, is that a fundamental change in the definition of hate speech? Because there's no tangible victim as such.
I mean, you could extrapolate it. I mean, OK, they're saying not political, but all right, we won't go down that one. But you know, to have the wider view that if you're celebrating the death of somebody like that, and they put in those tweets why they were celebrating them, and they were political reasons, you know, for her views on various subjects. Well, I think that does qualify. And these people know what they're putting. And what's more, Ian, it empowers other people to do it, not just to the high-profile figures, to the low-profile figures as well.
Yes, it really does. But again, it comes... I mean, this happens left and right, but mostly on the left. And I'm just repeating what I said before, in the sense that those people think they're morally correct. So having a pop at Ann Widdecombe is the same as having a pop at the devil, you know, to them. That's how they see it. So there's no victim involved.
Yeah, and that's where the mindset comes in. You know, you had the same with the Charlie Kirk celebrations. And what those was on the right have got to do we have to stand up and push back against this. And it might well be you need to cut off friends. You might need to cut off family. Because if people are celebrating these sort of things, I don't want them in my life. And it's too easy for us on the right. And I hear it so much, and it wants to say, oh, we can disagree. We can still be mates down the pub. You know something, Ian? I feel beyond that. I don't want to know any lefties in my family or not. Seriously, I want them out of my life. Definitely.
Yeah.
And I've taken steps to do that.
There are accidental lefties, though. People who think that, who don't really have political opinions, but they just kind of gravitate to one that they think sounds kindest.
Well,
which is nonsense, by the way.
Yeah, even that. I mean, that's frankly, that shows you're a nicer guy than me. Yeah, I'm. You know, it gets to the point where if I think people have got certain views with which, you know, if I think anybody celebrates Ann Widdecombe's death or Charlie Kirk's death, whether that's a family member, a friend of 50 years, or anybody, I don't want anything to do with them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Michael, thank you. Thank you for that, Michael in Birmingham. It's completely fair. You can have whatever view you want. You can mix with whoever you want. But Michael doesn't want to kill anyone because they have a different view to him. I find unqualified opinion more troubling than anything. I mean, it's, you know, Ann Widdecombe is associated with two things that I would say would be troubling for some people. One was her views on things like gay marriage, and a friend of mine who was a very close friend of Ann Widdecombe's, he's a gay man, got married, invited, I'm talking about Ian Dale here, you'll be familiar maybe with the story. He invited her to his wedding. She didn't attend and said she had something on that day, but he found out that actually she just didn't want to go because of her beliefs. He didn't mention it initially, he mentioned it years later. She was mortified. But that was her view, as she had a Christian view, and that element of Christianity that felt that that was something she could not endorse, so she didn't go. That's not breaking the law. That's her views. She didn't, you know, she didn't harm anything in that view. She tried to protect Ian from even finding out about her view in that respect, and he didn't hold it against her, and neither did his other half hold it against her. And she also was, of course, deeply associated with women being handcuffed in jail who were having babies. And I think I'm right in saying that she later threatened legal action to anyone who repeated that line, because I don't think it was it's a bit like Thatcher doesn't believe in society, which isn't quite, in fact, nowhere near quite the point she was making. So I think in many respects she was misquoted on that. But beyond that, I never, I spoke to Anne so many times, and she was regular with us on this programme, a regular on the station. As you now know, her last interview was with Mark here on Talk. So I don't think I ever heard her say anything go, blimey, did you hear what Widders said today? Unbelievable. Never, ever. 0344 499 1000 is the number. Now, how do you fancy winning a tax-free sum of money? We're talking £26,000. Just picture 26,000 quid in your bank account. You could clear some hefty old debt with that one. If your bank balance is crying out for a lift this summer, these are the details.
For your chance to win, visit talk.tv/win or text TALK to 8338 by 6 p.m. on the 20th of July 2026. Texts cost £2.50 plus your standard network rate. Or send your name and number by post to Comp 1, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP. To arrive by midnight on the 23rd of July 2026. 18 plus, UK residents only. So for your chance to win, text TALK to 8338 now. This is a network promotion, full T's and C's at talk.tv/win.
It is Talk. Jeremy says, I remember the days when Downing Street was open to the general public with just one bobby standing outside number 10 as the sole security. How the country has progressed. I remember my sister going on a trip to London. She went to the Houses of Parliament and was unfortunate enough to be shown around by Cyril Smith. We know Cyril Smith, of course, in later life, or some of them were aware of this, some of us were aware of this a little earlier, turned out to be a very active and horrendous paedophile. But he was one of those MPs that would show people around Parliament, and she happened to be on the visit that day with the school. They also went to Downing Street, where they stood outside the door of number 10. I think you could stand opposite, but there was no security. There was no big gates. Those were the days. 3 o'clock now. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Coming up on 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Yeah, welcome back to the programme. We've been talking, of course, counter-terrorism, police overtaking that investigation into the killing of Ann Widdecombe after fresh evidence came to light, reigniting urgent questions over the safety and protection afforded to politicians and public figures. Should politicians have more protection? Continuing thoughts on that. And, of course, our democracy rather thrives on the fact that we don't have all of that. Speaking of politicians, Andy Burnham facing demands to appear before MPs before the summer recess, with Conservatives branding it as unacceptable that Britain's next Prime Minister could enter Downing Street without ever having to face scrutiny from the House of Commons. When you put it like that, it's bad. Don't hold your breath. I don't sense this happening. But bizarre that we're going to get a politician, a new Prime Minister, and you won't necessarily hear from him for 6 weeks. And Ollie Robbins, the head honcho at the Foreign Office. Remember him, he's launched a legal action against the government over his sacking as Britain's top diplomat, seeking a judicial review after Downing Street blamed him for failing to flag Lord Mandelson's vetting failure ahead of his ambassadorial appointment. Details to come, more responses too. 0344 499 1000. This one in from David in Cheshire. Can we take all security from Sadiq Khan and give it to Nigel Farage? After all, Khan isn't even an MP. And he's always going on about how safe London is. Yes, apart from when he's inside his lovely armour-plated Range Rover, he's as safe as houses in there. Benson says MPs who are considered racist need more police protection, says Ben in Stockwell, which feeds into... So you get people who genuinely believe that, you know, I don't know, Nigel Farage or anyone who's a Reform member or candidate, therefore, by definition, is a racist. Now, once you've defined somebody as a racist, that's a pretty grim and horrendous thing to accuse somebody of, and you say that because the idea of being a racist is pretty grim, unsavoury and unpleasant. And if you believe somebody is that, then they are fair game for GIP, whether it's verbal or otherwise. Milkshakes in the street, they're fair game. They're just a mad racist. Now, this isn't said with any evidence. It's a belief system that some people who don't like reform have decided to believe because a party might have a serious or different immigration policy. Therefore, you must be a racist. And that's where the danger starts. I totally get where Ben in Stockwell is coming from on that point. 0344 499 1000. Now, Andy Burnham is expected to back the immigration bill in the Commons tonight, throwing his support behind Shabir Mahmood's changes to indefinite leave to remain and refugee settlement. He's also publicly backing the plan to finally deport the Rochdale grooming gang ringleader Shabir Ahmed. Thoughts on this as well. Let's speak to Amir Kotecha, CEO of the Centre for Government Reform. Always good to get you on, Amir, get your views on these things. Any surprise in this? Andy Burnham is sort of picking up the status quo on these 2 points.
Yeah, hi, Ian. On Shabir Ahmed, firstly, the despicable man who was the Rochdale grooming gang ringleader, I just want this man out of the country as quickly as possible, and I don't care what we need to do to make it happen. I found it very depressing how unprepared we are to do the necessary things that need to be done to make that happen, right? Shabir Mahmood is now saying, the Home Secretary is saying, we need to change this law, this 1971 law, in order to get rid of him. But then there is also the question about whether Pakistan will take him back, right? And I've been saying for a week now, or more than a week, we need to use the diplomatic levers that we have at our disposal. We need to force them to take him back. We stripped him of his British citizenship. That leaves him with only Pakistani citizenship. So he's their problem to deal with, and we should be able to get rid of him. And the thing I found depressing, Ian, is there's plenty of things that we could do. There's plenty of tools in the armory that we could use. We pay Pakistan still well over 100 million a year in foreign aid. We could threaten to take that away. There's all of the visas that we grant the Pakistani nationals. There's the remittances i.e. the money that Pakistani people here in the UK send back to Pakistan that we don't tax. I mean, there's just loads of things and even more niche, creative things that we could be doing. So, for example, Pakistan International Airlines recently got rights to operate in the UK again after being banned for years. So we could easily threaten to take that away. My point is, Ian, there's loads of things we could do. We just lack the backbone to do it.
It's interesting that, I mean, you can understand when new political parties emerge and they do attack the kind of groupthink of the system, as it were, because there is absolutely a groupthink, and I'm not suggesting this is a conspiracy theory. You know this better than me, but it's both much easier to retain the status quo on so many areas of policy. It's often less expensive. And of course, it means that civil servants in particular haven't got to get out of bed in the morning worrying they've got to actually do some work. So there's that as well. You can see why collectively it's in the interest of so many people not to mess around with how we've always done things.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in terms of how we've done things, you know, we have this sort of reluctance, this institutional reluctance to actually use the diplomatic clout that we have in the world to further domestic priorities. I mean, I think if you ask the average person in this country, you know, they would say, look, they support having a strong foreign office. They support having embassies around the world. They support having, empowered British diplomats, so long as they're actually going to use those powers, use that diplomatic clout to deliver the things that the British public care about. And the British public want to get rid of this despicable man from our country. We have the means to do it. And as you say, Ian, it's just a sort of institutional inertia or addiction to the status quo that stops us doing it. I mean, there are plenty of other countries around the world that are willing to throw their weight around diplomatically to achieve domestic objectives. We just don't seem to want to do it. And I think eventually the government will I think wake up, because they're making baby steps. Shabir Ahmed is now saying that she may be willing to change the law and she may be willing to leverage visas, but it's all just too slow and too timid for my liking.
Yeah, indeed. I was speaking to somebody at the weekend who's Pakistani origin, his parents are Pakistani, and he was saying that he doesn't know anyone in his cohort from his own background that doesn't think this man should be deported. So it's not as if there's some sensitivity. I know I'm only basing it on one anecdotal conversation, but it's not going to wreck race relations if we send a paedophile back to their country of origin. Because in this particular case, this guy was actually born there. It's not as if his parents were born there and he was brought up here. I mean, there would be a legit claim in that respect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no one seems to have a sort of moral argument against this happening. It's just that we don't have the stomach to actually do it. And, I don't know, perhaps we're worried about upsetting the Pakistani government, or some other reason. But, I think what's depressing here is not a single person who's been convicted for their involvement in the grooming gangs has been deported. These really represent the worst of our country, and we should be able to get rid of them. And, I think that I personally, I'm willing to say, we will cut foreign aid, we'll cut visas. And I think that would enable this to happen. I mean, I think personally the Pakistani government would fold very quickly if suddenly we said we're going to slap taxes on remittances or we're going to cut visas. Yeah,
all you've got to take is one person as a result of that. She's making a statement this afternoon on this, or she's about to make a statement. It wouldn't be hard, would it, to imagine someone who might be thinking this could be my last big announcement as Home Secretary, because there's definitely a reshuffle. In fact, there's absolutely definitely a reshuffle. It's not even a rumour, because we have a new Prime Minister coming in. So it could be the moment she actually uses this. And she's very tough, and she's certainly not backwards in coming forwards in sometimes departing from some of her Labour colleagues. If I can imagine any Labour MP saying this, it would be her. But will she have the guts, as it were, to go for it, Amir, and simply, you've written about it in Spite, how we can get rid of this man. Is she likely to take advice from your column and these kind of conversations? Doubtless she knows the options are there.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I mean, I have heard that she may say that she is willing to leverage the visas, right? So that if that's true, then that's a great start. But you know, there's lots of other tools, as I say, Ian, that we could draw upon. And you know, it's also worth saying it's not just Shabir Ahmed. You know, there's a couple of other perpetrators of the grooming gangs that, again, Pakistani nationals that, again, we haven't been able to deport. So you know, it's just depressing that it requires this much effort to get rid of one man. I mean, we should be in a position, you know, where we're in a relationship with these countries where, you know, we have an existing understanding that in these sorts of circumstances we will be able to deport these people. You know, otherwise, what is the point of even having diplomatic relations with these countries? I mean, I personally think our High Commission or our embassy in Islamabad, this should be at the very top of their priority list. And I just fear that, you know, all too often we take a sort of very, very softly approach rather than just getting more hard-nosed about things. And
Indeed. And I often say this about Donald Trump, and whether people agree or disagree with Donald Trump, sometimes you want a politician that's just going to stand up and say, right, this is what's going to happen. You almost need that kind of... But we've spent so long almost rehearsing our politicians and encouraging our politicians to be sort of press release junkies where they read this clinically prepared, nicely neat, clipped set of words written by a SPAD, okayed by another SPAD, sometimes run by a permanent secretary, and then they just read it out. And you think, no, let's have something that really comes from the gut here.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, you know, I think other countries do this routinely, as you say, the US, but lots of other countries are far more willing to actually play the cards that they hold in terms of, as I say, throwing their weight around diplomatically. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You know, ultimately, diplomacy comes down to negotiation, and it's perfectly legitimate for us to say, you know, this is a negotiation. You know, we are very happy to continue to allow your nationals in our country to send money back home, which is untaxed. But if you want to continue to have that privilege, those remittances, then you're going to have to do this for us. You know, diplomacy is about negotiation.
Of course it is.
Our government seems to forget that.
Yeah, and these rules, regulations, guidelines, I mean, nobody ever said they're cast in stone. I mean, there's flexibility, and you brilliantly outlined, Amir, where that flexibility could be. Let's hope that something like this happens. And thank you as ever, Amir, for being with us. Amir Kotecha, CEO of the Centre for Government Reform, with us here on Talk. This comes in from Ringshul Ninja, who says, real name, says, Whitefinger is a great idea for a James Bond remake. We were talking about Bond earlier and, you know, if it's all white. Anyway, says 007 could spend his time helping his local highways team repairing potholes and suffers from a bout of Whitefinger after spending too much time on a whacker plate. I love that image. And you can always hear the Bond the Bond music underneath it as he discovers the Whitefinger. Do you know, I was on a plane once. I should have told Finn this in the office. I was coming back from South Africa and I was sitting next, this is absolutely true, I was sitting next to a man wearing a pair of gold gloves all the way back on the flight, and he just sort of sat there with his gold gloves, and I kept thinking, why has he got gold gloves on? And I reckon about 2/3 of the way through the flight, he turned to me and said, are you wondering about the gold gloves? And I, because I'm British, went, no, like I never thought about it, despite the fact I'd spent 4 hours wondering about the gold gloves. And then he went on to explain to me he had some kind of neurological issue, and the gloves were quite tight on his hands for whatever reason. And he explained, and then the guy on the other side of me, clearly aware that something was going on. I'm quite a young guy at this point. The guy, he had red gloves. The guy just tapped me on the shoulder on the other side and went, what's the deal with Goldfinger? I remember thinking, that's the funniest line ever. And I couldn't then impart to him what he'd just told me without it being bloody obvious I was talking about it. But the funny thing is, since then, I've mentioned this to a couple of neurologists, and they have no idea. They were aware of something about the tightening of an item, but the fact that it had to be gold. So this was just bling, really. There was no medical reason behind the... It wasn't like it reflected heat or did something like that. I think that was just his choice. So if you ever see a man on a plane with a pair of gold gloves, just tread carefully, because it might be a neurological thing. I can't even remember what the detail of it was. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Oh, I thought I hadn't plugged myself in then, but it was just Amy hadn't put the microphone on. I was blaming myself there in an act of blatant self-flagellation. Voice of Doom. So before the news at 3 o'clock, we played you the brand new, all impossible mystery voice. This was the voice.
I just don't think that's accurate.
These are some of the guesses. Bill Clinton, Henry Cavill. Henry Cavill, is he? I think he's an actor, isn't he? Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Ronald Reagan, Mitch McConnell, Bob Dole, Chris Coons, Whitney Houston, Jesse Jackson, Ali Fleischer, Colin Powell. It was none of those. Can we hear the voice again?
I just don't think that's accurate.
I think that's pretty darn impossible. I just can't imagine anybody would get that right. However, on day one, Becca, we don't know anything about Becca or where Becca's from, got the correct answer. I don't know how. Let's hear it again.
I just don't think that's accurate.
I mean, that's incredibly astute to be able to guess from that. And there'll be many of you going, who? It's an American politician called Walter Mondale, who was the vice president to Jimmy Carter. That, I think, even predates me. So that goes back a bit. Walter Mondale was the right answer. Well done to Becca. Nobody else got it right. There is no prize. It's not like a maze or something where you win a house. There's none of that old lark going on here. Absolutely not. Sally is in Bournemouth. Sally, what have you got for us? Good afternoon to you.
Well, good afternoon. You've moved me 100 miles or so, but never mind.
Where are you?
Monmouth.
What did I say?
Bournemouth.
Did I say Bournemouth?
Yeah.
Do you know what? I genuinely, this is not like a sort of dad joke, you know, I genuinely do need to get these specs changed. I can't see out the damn things. Anyway, how is Bournemouth today? Monmouth today?
Monmouth is very pleasantly sunny, but not too hot.
Good, yeah. That's good to hear. Anyway, back to Matt. Now we've done the weather forecast and changed where you live. What are your thoughts on the strange political arena we found ourselves in the last few years?
Well, I think a large part of the problem is that they've stopped teaching or doing debating in schools. When I was at school and was a member of the debating society, if anyone said about a subject, oh, I really want to talk about that, I'm really interested, I want to propose it, or what have you.
Yeah.
The person running the debate would say, if you really want to propose it, you're opposing. You've got to go out and find and present a convincing case for the opposing side.
Right, so you've got to recognise the opposite opinion to the one you have?
Yes.
OK.
And the point about that is that you can go to a debate and if your mind's already made up, you won't hear what the other side is saying.
You genuinely won't. I mean, it's that kind of confirmation bias with booster rockets.
Exactly. But if you have to go and look it up and make the case and stand up and say it, you get a more balanced view.
You really do, and it's the old sort of thing of reading both The Guardian and The Telegraph as two obvious examples.
Yes, exactly. And I just think that is something which has been lost in the way schools are now having to teach the curriculums and so on and so forth. And, you know, that whole thing about civilised debate has gone out of the window.
Yeah, that's a really good starting point, isn't it? The failure to kind of understand someone's view. And that doesn't mean to say it's not infuriating sometimes, and it doesn't mean that you would necessarily change your view, but at least you've explored the other view, because you can only really, I suppose, intelligently construct your own argument if you're fully aware of the arguments that lie against you.
Yes. I mean, this is one of the things people always said about Boris Johnson when he couldn't make up his mind about Brexit and he sat down and wrote both sides. That's what he was doing.
Yeah, what he did there was, because that's often a kind of mistell of the story, isn't it? People say, well, he just wrote two because he didn't really care which one it was. And you're absolutely right. He wrote two, but he did so diligently and carefully to look at both and found himself coming out on the side of leaving. Now, we can argue whether, in reality, he was a guy that went which way he thought the wind was going to blow more favourably in his direction. But nonetheless, that's why he wrote two, to look at both sets of evidence.
Yeah, because that's what he'd been taught to do at school.
Agreed, yeah.
And we're not being... You know, there are some things where you can be fairly dogmatic, scientific experiments. Well, yes, if you put something in potassium permanganate, if you deoxygenate potassium permanganate, that beautiful purple liquid goes brown. I know. I saw it happen in front of me.
Did you? OK, are you sure? Because I thought it went black.
Well, no, it goes a murky, muddy brown. And when
no, it's black.
And when the school teacher...
There's no brown involved in it.
The chemistry teacher looked at the test tube. She said, what have you done to it? I said, I haven't touched it. She said, everybody out.
Wow.
Because all the oxygen was leaching out of the lab.
So you were a walking biohazard?
Well, I wasn't, but something had leaked into the lab that was leaching all the oxygen out of the atmosphere, and she spotted it because the potassium permanganate had turned brown.
Black.
Yeah.
That's... I'm just messing. That is incredible. That's a very good point. How do we get onto that, by the way? I've just forgotten about why the chemistry analogy came in.
There are some things you can be absolute about.
Oh, I see. That's right. Yes. Yeah, you're right. There are things that are just basic fact. That also gets forgotten, doesn't it, in debate, where people pick their own facts. Because you can pick your own opinion and you can have your own views, but you can't have your own facts.
That's right. And evidence is fact. Evidence is not opinion.
Spot on. Sally, I love it. Say hello to the good people of Bournemouth, won't you?
I will indeed. Next time I'm there in about 5 years' time.
Fantastic. You've got it booked in because you have to book ahead down there. Listen, Sally, thank you very much indeed for that. Sally in Monmouth with that point. It's a really, really good point. Whether you have to explore every single argument that somebody else might have, you don't always, because instinctively somehow you just have a view and you can kind of sum it up quite quickly and you're more than aware of what someone with a different view might think about it. So you haven't got to sit down and write 5,000 words every time you come up with a view. You can't have your own facts. You know, the one that always confuses me, and I was talking to somebody on social media, I think it was Philip, about CO2s and the environment. And this is a similar argument about things like COVID. So I made a comment on air, which was, you know, we all want a cleaner environment, and if somebody says, you know, we've got to reduce those CO2s, then fantastic. You know, I'll run with that. But at the moment, we're not going to die. You know, let's get on with doing other stuff. We don't have to buy, you know, close every oil foundry or every ambition to drill because of that. Something of those lines. And the guy picked me up on it and said, CO2s are not a danger. And now, I wasn't advocating that they were. I was advocating the view of the scientific world that they are. So it was their view that I was simply reflecting. They say that too many CO2s. And of course, their argument is that, yes, CO2 is not toxic, but too much CO2, if it's man-made, and this is their argument, of course, if it's man-made, it messes with the balance. So it's not that in of itself, CO2 is going to kill you, but if it monkeys around with the balance of everything else going on, that's where the problems start. So too many CO2s just muck with the system. And then he said, yeah, but what about these scientists? And then, of course, I've seen it a million times. There's like 2,000, well, they're not all scientists. They're people who've got, a different view. 2,000 scientists that have that view, that don't worry about the CO2s. Whack a load more into the atmosphere. Life's better for it. Like laughing gas, you know, whack it out there. It's not going to kill anyone. It's brilliant. So there's these 2,000 scientists that think that, but there's 98,000 that don't think that. So where do you put your money? If you had to go down to the bookmakers and say, right, who's right here? The 98,000 or the 2,000? And this sounds a bit weird, because most people go, well, I'd imagine the 98,000. By the way, they aren't all getting brown envelopes from, sponsors and whatever. Some might be, but think about it. They haven't all kind of gone through amazing university degrees and studies on geology, atmosphere, pollutants and the like, and then gone, so what I'm going to completely change my mind on what I actually believe in. So 98,000 believe that, 2,000 don't. But some of us gravitate to the 2,000. Why do we do that? What is our reasoning for doing that? I don't know. I'm not advocating I know the answer. I never, ever do. I'm not an expert in it, and I think you kind of have to be to have that argument. So some arguments, just on the back of what she just said, Sally said, sometimes you sort of have to leave those kind of arguments to experts. But then even there's a division. Go figure. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, just gone 3:30. Mark in Staffordshire said, because politicians don't carry out what the public voted, the belief in the system is eroded. The extreme groups shout the loudest and the politicians appease them. It's not hard to see where it went wrong, says Mark. That's a really good point about the who shouts the loudest. It also comes back to a not dissimilar point to what I was just making about who, where is the truth in these things. And that's the Andy Burnham test. Is Andy Burnham carving out a political narrative because he knows that, and I'm going to put the same caveat in, I still find this hard to believe. There are apparently more people, I've just thought of an extra caveat to this, so bear with me. There's more people on the left than there are on the right, OK? That's the general consensus. That's not a left-wing belief. Last time I interviewed Rafe on the show, he made that very point. There's more on the left. You've got more chance of getting lefties than righties. OK, so you've got conservatives that are sort of light, so not on the left, but certainly not part of what you'd call the right. So more people on the left, so therefore Andy Burnham will play to the left because it suits him. Now, this is interesting because I can see why more people might vote left, but I don't think, upon analysis, that people are left, if that makes sense. So when you speak to somebody who says, oh yeah, absolutely, I'm a true Labour person, and then ask them about, well, if you had the money, would you send your kid to a private school? Yes. If you had an accident or your mum or your nan broke their leg, private care was going to sort it out quicker than state care, the NHS, would you go? Yes, I would. OK, do you think people should be responsible for X? You will find actually they're not that left-wing, but sometimes vote that way because that seems in their world that it makes them a nicer person. Curious, eh? 0344 499 1000. Now, the price children pay for free nursery. It's an interesting story, this. Former nursery teacher who now works in Westminster, Fleur Elizabeth Meston, is with us. Fleur, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I didn't know you did this in the past. We sort of don't really know each other, but we've spoken before, follow each other on socials and stuff. I had no idea of the mysterious backstory of Fleur, but there it is. So you've worked in a nursery, you no longer do. So what's your assessment of this? Bridget Phillipson is arguing that free nursery expansion to families on benefits is a fundamentally flawed policy.
Well, there are three main issues with this. One of them being, I think, what got the most attention online, which is how unfair it is for people who are not working to be given free childcare while working parents are struggling by paying eye-watering sums because they have to send their children to nursery. So that's the first one. The second one is staffing, which, if you just think about this logically, you want to expand 30 hours free childcare to people who are on benefits. That is a huge amount of children that will then be entering into the childcare system. And where are the staff going to come from to look after them? We already have nurseries closing all across the country. And the reason that I left the job that I absolutely adored was because I started as an apprentice on £3.90 an hour, working 10-hour days with a half-hour break. It's an intense job. And then that just rises to minimum wage. Like, it's not an attractive career. And the third thing is that children are, studies have shown, best being raised by their parents at that very young age. So I'm totally against this proposal. I don't think she's announced it as a solid policy, but it's just putting feelers out. And I hope that she's getting the reception that's the plan I get.
Well, let's be honest, you might not have a job in about 10 days' time, so you never know what the heck's going to go on. It is interesting, though, isn't it? The Labour government they do sort of dine out, and they love a breakfast club, and they love a free nursery place, don't they? It's almost what gets them out of bed in the morning.
They do, and this is just every sort of policy that's told is to support parents, is to support mothers back into work, rather than allowing them to even have the choice to stay at home with their small children. Breakfast clubs, after school clubs, the years of free childcare getting younger and younger. It's just all about getting your children to be raised by professionals rather than by their parents or even grandparents as soon as possible and as much as possible. And I think that I was raising other people's children for the vast majority of their waking hours.
Yep.
And people in Whitehall, they may have to do that with their own children because they've chosen to work in politics. You know, it's an intense job, but a lot of people do not want to do that.
Is it, I mean, the obvious counters to what we're saying here, Fleur, is that, well, you know, life's too expensive. You can't any longer have one parent going to work. You need to have two parents. You know, when I was a kid, grew up in a very, very basic background, but my mum was at home with us until I think we were about 10 or something, and even then she only became a dinner lady, so I still saw her every day, which was, you know, good and bad in some respects. But it was pretty standard practice. That is not achievable for many people now because, you know, the cost of living dictates that you need two wages, and if you've got two wages, you need childcare.
Exactly, and the two groups of people who are able to be at home with their children are sort of the mega rich, where one parent can work and the other can be a stay-at-home mum or dad if they wish to be. And then those who are unemployed, maybe living on universal credit, and they are able, you know, they may struggle financially and in many other ways, but they at least get the chance to have quality time with their children. But the policy would then say, well, now you can give your children to nursery for 30 hours a week. And it's other parents, working parents, who are having to subsidise that through their taxes. It's totally unfair.
It's sort of, to me, it's just fundamentally flawed that the ideal policy for a government would be for the government to pay for your childcare. If you put it that way, it seems it's sort of, at one level it's a bit obscene, but and I'm not talking about just the money, but just the idea that, you know, the state becomes the sort of surrogate parent. But on another level, it's just bonkers, isn't it? I mean, there are clearly cases where somebody is struggling, but to aspire to a statist view of parenting is, to me, at a fundamental level, quite disturbing.
Yeah, I don't know where this is coming from. If it is the state wants more control of children's minds from an earlier age. I know I had to do, I was in a sort of very traditional working class area when I did the bulk of my nursery work, but in other nurseries I worked in, there was a lot of like British values and learning about other cultures, which is great, but, you know, 2-year-olds, they're like, they can't even wash their hands without help. They're not really going to be understanding these concepts. So, but the policy they changed the ratios so that one staff member could look after 5 2-year-olds instead of 4 2-year-olds. This was Jeremy Hunt's budget in 2023. And the reasoning behind it was to encourage more mums back into the workplace to grow our economy. That's the goal. It's not what's best for the children or for the parents. It's just money.
There is, of course, you know, there are some people who would who sort of thrive on this and just think that, and again, you could argue, well, should there be a licence to be a parent? But that's a whole other debate, isn't it? But, you know, dropping the kids off, making them somebody else's responsibility is for some people a bit of a lifestyle choice.
It is, and I think that's very sad. And obviously, some people have children unexpectedly. They didn't sort of set out to be a parent, but that's what, you know, if you have to go back to work and if you really struggle as a parent being at home with your children, then that is something that childcare exists as sort of a backup for. But it's not the sort of thing that should just be subsidized. I see it as a necessity or a luxury, but it's not the goal. It's not something that we should be encouraging all people to be sending their toddlers to for 30 hours a week.
Got it. Listen, Fleur, great to see you. Great to have you on. Thank you for your time. Fleur Elizabeth Meston, former nursery teacher. She did 8 years in that job, now works over there at the centre of power in Westminster. It's an interesting one. Maybe there's a respite thing in there as well. It's a bit like breakfast clubs, after-school clubs. Although I think they're slightly different. You tend to, I mean, breakfast clubs, I don't know how many, sort of what the percentage of people who get free breakfast clubs. So our little boy, like today, for example, he's an after-school club. Now, you have to pay for that. So that's not a free thing. And that's just a practical thing on this particular day. It doesn't even do it regularly. But for some kids that are there, they are there at breakfast club and at after-school club. And I find that kind of interesting, that your child is in state care from, I think I've got these numbers right, from about 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. And that's a long old day, because those fundamentals of, I mean, breakfast in our house with our youngest is, it can be the most hilarious thing. It can be carnage. You know what a kid's like, OK? A little 7-year-old monkeying around. The trainers don't fit. That's not right. Where's my Pokemon cards? Have I got my squishes? No, I don't want to take that one. Who's my brother's nicked my squish? I mean, it can be carnage. But to miss all of that at both ends of the day, because your kid comes home at 6 o'clock, if they're a toddler, I mean, they're going to be in bed within the hour almost. So you're not going to get a lot of time with them. And I wonder about that. And I sympathise with people who have to do that. And there's no way around it because it's a work thing. But I do know for a fact there are some people who choose to do that. And I find that a little bit disturbing. 0344 499 1000. Let me also bring you a post from Donald Trump on the latest from Iran. This is one of his Truth Social posts. He says, the Hormuz Strait is open and will remain open with or without Iran. We are reinstating the Iranian blockade, so named because it's only stopping Iran's ships or customers from entering or leaving. All other countries will have fair and open use of the strait. The USA will be, from this point onwards, known as the guardian of the Hormuz Strait. Wow. But as such, and as a matter of fairness, will be reimbursed at the rate of 20% on all cargo shipped for any and all costs necessary to do the job of providing safety and security to this very volatile section of the world. The process and formation will begin immediately. Thank you for your attention on this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So they're renaming the strait as the US will be known as the guardian of the Hormuz Strait, and they will charge you 20% tax to go through it. Now, I might have read that all wrong, but I don't think I have. Only payable in crypto, apparently. I made that bit up, but that could well come out the Oval Office. So there it is. That is the latest from Donald Trump. We'll do some more tweets, more comments and calls in just a few moments' time. 0344 499 1000. Call it to 4. This is Talk.
Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to win a massive £26,000. The question is, what would you do with all that money?
I don't know. We've got a wedding.
I would buy a camper van.
Probably just like clothes, yeah.
Not on a big holiday. Immigrate.
So if you fancy getting your hands on £26,000 tax-free, here's all the details you need to enter.
For your chance to win, visit talk.tv/win or text TALK to 8338 by 6 p.m. on the 20th of July 2026. Texts cost £2.50 plus your standard network rate. Or send your name and number by post to Comp 1, PO Box 3190, Colchester CO2 8GP. To arrive by midnight on the 23rd of July 2026. 18 plus, UK residents only. So for your chance to win, text TALK to 8338 now. This is a network promotion. Full T's and C's at talk.tv/win.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
We've been exploring this afternoon, I say exploring, having a chat, a common sense conversation about whether politicians deserve more protection. It was interesting in the first hour we spoke to a counter-terrorism expert who's worked specifically in the field of protecting politicians in the wake of Joe Cox, but he was doing this before then as well, assessing risk on people also like Prince Harry and the like. Sometimes when you think there's a risk, there actually isn't a serious risk, not one that would warrant 24-hour security, even if it sometimes looks that way. And how would you finance that? Who would you decide, you know, if every politician said, I'm going to base it on my Twitter feed, mostly, which is not unreasonable, because if you get too much of that, and I can't remember the last case where there was a politician that said it just became unbearable to look at a Twitter feed and seeing people who want you dead, want your livelihood removed, want your children deprived of a mother because you have a different opinion. And it is absolutely true that women get a far harsher time. I mean, look, there are figures like Nigel Farage who get absolutely brutally annihilated by those that simply have a different opinion to him. But on balance, if you see some of the stuff that women get online, it is very, very different and often very much more regular than some guys get. Now, I can say, look, the answer is you come off social media in the end. So you can no longer use it as a tool to announce things to your constituents or whatever it is you do if you've got a government job. But when you get too much of that, you can try and avoid some of it, but you're meant to read it. That's the point. People are writing it to you. I think you should be dead and you should be raped before you die. How many comments like that from your fellow humans can you get before you start to think, what the hell is going on? And genuinely, even if those threats are by horrendous, sick half-wits, you would begin to feel very unsafe, and you'd be concerned about your safety. You'd be concerned about your kids' safety. It would no longer be a pleasurable job to be in. Your idea of helping out other people, if that was your motivation to be an MP, would be completely scuppered. Let's go to Matt in Cheshire. Matt, what have you got for us? Afternoon.
Hi, very good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
Well, can we say provably and categorically that this government is going to go out of its way to protect its political opponents on the way they've treated the public, which is, I mean, they've imprisoned people for free speech violations. They've put people in prison after the Southport killings. So what can we say categorically that this government actually does want to protect its political opponents?
Well, it's a good point, although, you know, in fairness, this stuff happened before this government, of course. I mean, we can talk about whether it's increased. I mean, it might have increased in the wake of riots, but we know that the knock on the door and the arrest and the 6 police cars showing up predates Keir Starmer. I just don't think that area, Matt, has been properly, you know, the College of Policing or whoever come up with an initiative and an idea about, you know, non-crime hate incidents. And I think it's a classic case where the government, the Home Office, go along with it. I don't even think they stop to think about it. Oh, here's a policy. Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's written into, there's not a separate law that says you have to do this. It just sort of slides into the system. And before you know it, it's out of control. And we've got, as you rightly say, people go to jail for it. It's not to say that there isn't such a thing as a tweet that could be libelous, in which case you deal with it yourself through the courts, or genuinely threatening. But the idea we send people to jail for idiocy, which is mostly what it is, right? It's not, you know, criminal, is extraordinary.
There have been a lot of high-profile, really horrible events since Labour came to power, really sickening events like we've never seen the likes of. And we're all tiptoeing around having Labour's discussion about online when there are brutal crimes going on in the streets and savagery. And everybody gets sucked into the conversation of online this, online that, whereas nobody ever speaks about the solutions and how to get these things stopped in the first place.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I'd like to think we do touch on those issues that are crucial. I mean, obviously, there's an online element to political harassment. It probably happens mostly online, and that's obviously been the theme for obvious reasons as to what has happened to poor Ann Widdecombe. But you're right, the other stuff. But I think, Matt, that comes back to the idea of a kind of, you know, the press release thing I always go on about, the groupthink thing I always go on about. You know, you've not got politicians. I mean, I just read out that tweet from Donald Trump. It might be a bit bonkers, but sometimes you want to hear a politician just really say it from the gut, sound a bit angry, a bit animated. We don't have that, left or right.
The anger is coming from the left, but it's in a quiet way, and the right are just taking it, and they're not attacking the left. They're just sort of tiptoeing around.
When was the last time? I mean, the obvious thing is that, you know, channel migrants. You know, even legit migrants are against the channel migrant issue. So you've got something like that. When was the last time you ever heard or saw a politician get really... I mean, Nigel Farage, obviously it's part of his DNA, so... But looking at the two main parties, did you ever hear a Labour or a Tory Home Secretary get genuinely angry about the channel crisis?
I just immediately thought of Lee Anderson then, Ian, and without people like him, things like that wouldn't even get mentioned if it were for reform the same. But I just think this government, what's happening in the last few weeks, it's all a lot of people I'm speaking to are thinking it's very suspicious, not very nice. You know, Andy Burnham's coming in on the back of 2 horrific crimes, and we're meant to just all get on with it and just talk about it as if it's just to do with arguments online and people being anonymous.
But are you saying that, I mean, obviously we don't know, when you say 2 crimes, what you're referring to Ann Widdecombe?
Yeah, Ann Widdecombe's murder, some of the more high-profile murders since Labour have been in power. There's an element of, they're using a stick to beat us in, and I think everybody knows that, and nobody is calling them out for it.
How do you mean they're using a stick to beat us? Give us I'm not quite sure what you mean, Matt.
Lucy Connolly, people who got imprisoned after Southport, people who have been not even put in prison for much worse rioting offences. Just the stinking hypocrisy of it all, Ian. You know, Labour will just keep doing this to the people.
But didn't I mean, I always come back to this. The Tories did this in 2011 during the riots. They put, you know, the guy that went to jail for nicking a bottle of mineral water I think he got 18 months. 6 months, 18 months, something like that. Because they were trying to say, because the biggest nightmare for a government is public unrest en masse. It's the one thing that, of all the things that literally stops them sleeping, public unrest is up there. So the minute it happens, big sentences, stiff sentences, swift sentences. Happened in 2011, happened after Southport, not justifying it, by the way, because nobody should be going to jail for some of this stuff. Listen, Matt, I stopped there for time, no other reason, but you make a great point, and certainly about that sense of bewilderment that we have, particularly towards this government. But I just think the Tories never covered themselves in glory on so many of these issues either. Thoughts on all of this, 0344 499 1000. You can message 87222. They will be the numbers you need to get in touch with Kevin O'Sullivan, who's here after the news at 4. Kev.
Hello, mate. Yeah, I had an interesting week.